Alrighty, hello and welcome to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda, and I am joined today by the one and only Ben Asaro, wearing his awesome Knights of Last Call merch as befits someone of his stature. Thank you.
Had to bust out the livery.
Yes, exactly. And also sporting a sexy Harnmaster Mega Box set there in the background. For those of you who don't know, that's a game. That's a world that even intimidates me in its depth and complexity. But somehow there's a burgeoning group of people on the Knights of Last Call Discord that are actually have copious amounts of experience with this game. So, we may not be playing 5th edition as a community, but we're talking about Harnmasters, so there's that.
Something to be said for that.
There is something to be said about that. Welcome, everyone. So this is the last and final stream of our holiday celebration stream week. Again, brought to you by the Knights of Last Call Patreon, and of course, the incredible support and generous donations and tips that all of you have given us over the course of the last several weeks. So we're here today to sort of wrap it up, and quite frankly, I'm starting to feel it a little burnout. So it's perfect that Ben was available and gracious enough to come on today, and he's going to help us talk about NPCs.
I think sorry, not to cut you off, but I was just thinking between the two of us, we've kind of had our own little mini con this last week. You handled the panels, I took the gaming,
right?
And we had a lot going on.
Yeah, see, this is what they don't tell you when you get into quote unquote content creation. I had the entire week off, right? And I spent, maybe 13 or 14 hours streaming or getting ready for streams or doing stuff like that. Meanwhile, Ben spent that time actually playing games. So it was kind of like it's like, hey, I wanted to be the one that was playing games all the time. So real quick, just want to give a shout out to some people in chat. We've got Beowulf here. We've got Unfortunate Pumpkin is here as well, hello. Cooperative Waffles is in the house. Lollipop, Boothby unexpectedly made it. Awesome. Thank you, Boothby. Heavy Metal Mystic. Catazor is back. Hello, Catazor. Pumpkin is cheering for Boothby's illnesses. That is allowing him to be here. KC is here, has a question. He says, how does the gauntlet of holiday break gaming going, Ben?
It's going good. I actually am taking a break from the break. We're picking it up on New Year's Day, but I'm taking a couple days just to actually relax.
Right.
But we did 9 games in 10 days. So
and 9
pretty good. Separate
different systems.
Yeah.
It's just wild, crazy. And then the piece de resistance, the cherry on top, New Year's Day, right? You are burning some characters in Burning Wheel, right?
Burning Wheel character burn session. Yeah.
So and I think that's even the way that the game suggests that you do it, right? Like, is that you should burn a character first before you really try to start playing the game for real, because it's
just high level concept of idea and then character burn.
Yeah, exactly. Vlax, hello. Welcome, Vlax. Nice to see you. Satir says it's nice to see Ben on screen again. Yes, absolutely. Kay Steinwind is here. Rule of Cool. Tim C is in the house. Hello. And we've got a bunch of other people. We got Keith, we got Kalamakis, and we've got Roman. Welcome, everybody. I'm sure we'll get a couple more people who are going to be streaming in and coming in. But so let's talk about NPCs, because this is something that Ben and a couple other people have been talking about or voting for on some Patreon stream topics, and we haven't had a chance to get to them. But Ben's here, so this is a great time to talk about it. So let's start with the premise, which is what I was telling Ben, which is, to be honest with Ben, with you all, while I think that my NPCs are better today than they were in days of yore, the truth of the matter is that through my teenage years, my sort of foundational years, into my 20s when we were playing 3rd edition D&D, especially when we were playing 3rd edition D&D, I was known amongst my play group as being really bad with NPCs. It was pretty much a given, and we'll talk about some of the drawbacks or some of the cons that people could do for NPCs. But the fact of the matter is, my NPCs usually fell into one of two roles, neither of which particularly endeared them to the party. The first was the nobody wants to play a cleric NPC heal bot type character. A very much a background support. I remember my very first 3rd edition campaign, the party had an NPC named Lydia or something like that. She was a druid. She followed the party around and she healed them. We had another dungeon campaign where there was an elven cleric named Lorath, and he followed the party around and basically healed them. So while they didn't hate those NPCs, my Derek of today views those NPCs as complete failures. And then the second thing that I would do is I would, curse your inevitable betrayal. I would have NPCs join the party or be like their patron or their benefactor. And again, I predominantly at that time period was mostly playing heroic fantasy style games, D&D and stuff like that. This is before I'd started getting into Dungeon World and Powered by the Apocalypse and all that other stuff. So what ended up happening is once bitten, twice shy. Every time my party encountered an NPC that wasn't immediately like, oh, that's a heal bot, they would be like, okay, so what's their angle? How are they going to try to fuck us? Like, where's the betrayal coming? Where's the double cross coming? And as a result, my players just would like almost stonewall my NPCs in any attempt for them to get close. So those were my two main. That's where I came from. Ben. So I don't know if what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, the cleric NPC heal bot is just, to me, that is classic. I'm 14 years old.
Yes.
I'm playing with a bunch of other dudes that are 14 years old, and no one wants to be the cleric, but we need the healing. Like, that is, to me, that's almost like a rite of passage in D&D.
Right.
You have to portray the cleric. And I'll tell you my first early cleric. So this is going back to probably early 90s. We were still playing first edition at that point. And here we have a drugstore chain called Walgreens here.
We got them here.
And they have their own brand of off-brand medicine,
yeah,
right?
wall drill. And
yes, and that was literally the name of the cleric, was Waldrill, named after their knockoff Benadryl, because I just saw it on the shelf and went, oh, that's a great name for a cleric. And that became kind of like, and we'll talk about this too, I have certain NPCs that live across like the multiverse of my games, and they are named the same. And they continue to kind of sometimes have almost like a diegetic memory of the last campaign they were in. And Waldrill is one of those people. There's another one that I use a lot called Willem.
Yes.
And then there's Captain Argosy, was like probably the longest running NPC.
So it's so funny that you say that, because and to be fair, I think I took this from a Conan novel, one of the like the Tor fantasies, not like the Robert E. Howard, but it might have been, I don't know. But I think it was Robert Jordan. But he had like a grizzled one-eyed lieutenant in one of his thing named Hordo. Okay. And I've had literally the Hordo character in like so many campaigns, to the point where people like Aaron, who've played with me for decades, are basically like, oh, this is the Hordo guy, and it's like, yeah, we'll just call him Hordo, because you're going to end up calling him that anyways. And so I do have these sort of NPCs that, in a weird way, I know that the party is going to react favorably to this concept or this idea because it's worked before in prior campaigns. And so I kind of just, roll it out for existing campaigns. Real quick, we did get a super chat from Hides His Eyes, 10 pounds. Thank you. Been looking forward to this stream. I'm not great with NPCs. You and me both, buddy. I have trouble making them feel distinct, and it's hard to keep track of them in an ongoing campaign. Thank you again for these streams. Well, I think that's a lot of what we're gonna kind of get into and talk about.
Yeah, we're gonna dig into the nitty gritty of NPCs, what they are and aren't, how to handle them, not in a mechanical sense, numbers, but how do you just handle basically creating your own milieu, right? Like,
right.
How do you keep all those balls in the air all the time?
Right.
And I think a great learning experience, I mean, for me, even now, still a great learning experience was 4 months ago. We started playing a first edition AD&D campaign with about 20 players, 1-to-1 time.
Not all 20 at once.
No, but we will. I mean, we've had 12 people show up.
Okay,
so,
that's a lot.
Yeah, it can get pretty big. It all depends. But what we have, what I found is, after logging thousands and thousands of lines of async, the number of NPCs that are just out there now is just absolutely bonkers. And little things that I've done to even help, someone who's done it for a while, trying to help figure out, like, who knows this NPC and how do they know them? Like, these are things that you kind of have to keep notes of, because you might not come across an NPC for 5 months,
right?
4 months.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things that you said there, but before we get too far into it, I kind of want to make sure we're all level setting. We're all big into definitions here. So, what is an NPC, right? How would you define an NPC, right? Obviously, it stands for non-player character. So in theory, everything that is not the PCs is an NPC, but there's definitely gradients of that, right? Because like you could argue that like the fighter's henchman or hireling is an NPC. The druid's bear companion is an NPC of sorts, but the random barmaid, the random, blacksmith, those are NPCs as well. So there is like a spectrum of how non-player they really are, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of fluidity in there as well in terms of, so generally speaking, an NPC is a non-player character. That's what it stands for. That is a character that no players currently at the table are controlling.
Okay.
Some groups play where if a player misses a session, they will allow their character to be present and to be controlled by the GM at the table or the DM, but they're not there. So then technically, is that an NPC or a PC? Where's that line? There's a lot of fluidity there. Generally in those kinds of situations, and I do the same thing, which we'll get into with what I call an allied NPC, which is I control the NPC in terms of their motivations, goals, desires, personality. But when it comes to any kind of conflict, I am hands off. The players control that character and what they're actually going to do. And I'm just reacting as an actor would, depending on what they plan on doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I'm very similar in that way. In our Legend of the Five Rings campaign, we had several samurai, but two of the samurai, one was a courtier, one was a shugenja, which is a spiritual spellcaster, neither of whom is really expected to be in combat. And so they have yojimbo, they have bodyguards that follow them around. Now, these are NPCs and that I sort of have information and play for. But when we get into a conflict and the steel is drawn, actually it works out really well because the diplomatic character really isn't that great in combat anyway. So he kind of goes and hides at the outskirts of the battle, but he gets to play as the NPC, in the combat. So it's kind of like that kind of fluidic way to switch between them, I think could be a very, very useful and powerful tactic. We did have another super chat from Save Versus, who we were just having a conversation with on the Discord. He said, saying NPCs are more than just numbers. I feel attacked. JK. So to be clear, Save Versus, I didn't get to weigh in on that. Well, we could talk about this, but I didn't absolutely hate that. I didn't love it like Pumpkin loved it, but I do think that there is something about being very discreet and clear with, hey, this is how this NPC can help you, as opposed to more vague things. And sometimes having a discrete value or number can be helpful. Yeah.
But I think we kind of agree on what we think an NPC is now, right?
Right, exactly. Now, to be clear, I think, whether it is, and I think whether it's a party member, essentially a virtual party member, or whether it's just somebody in the background, right? The principles don't change about how you make the NPC interesting. What does change is how much juice are you getting out of that squeeze, right? And I think it goes without saying that you need to, as a GM, at least this is my sort of takeaway, you need to sort of right-size it. When I have some random throwaway character NPC and I'm expecting the party to interact with it, I might only think of one or two knots. In fact, my most common go-to thing, I have more detailed things, but my most common go-to thing is I pick some Oracle table, some, random table that has like D100 personality traits, and I just roll it. And that's the only thing that I know. Maybe maybe race, gender, but a lot of times I'll just pick something that seems appropriate, but I'll just get a random motivation, a random personality twerk. And that's it. And that's all I have. But I wait to see, is the party feeling this NPC? Because they get to tell me who they care about. They get to tell me who they're interested in. And then I can build the detail later.
That's a very interesting point that kind of goes into like exploding it out a little bit. And I'm a firm believer in that the type of NPC depends on the kind of game you're playing.
True.
And I do tend to lump them into three categories. And one is like the Save Versus category, right? Which we're talking about on the Discord about like, he gives me a plus bonus. This is a very gamist kind of approach. I call those versus games.
Got it.
And a versus game is you are usually bringing on hirelings or mercenaries or camp followers of some kind to bulk up your numbers and to increase your odds of succeeding in whatever the thing is you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's tactical. It doesn't necessarily have to be combat, right? Like it could be like, I'm hiring these smiths to fix our armor while we're in town. I have my own personal people to take care of my horse. It's very logistical almost in a way, right? Army-like.
Yeah, it's very, you got a checklist and you're making sure you have all the little things filled out and you swap them out as needed. You ask who, does anyone have any hirelings? Anyone have any gold so we can hire hirelings to make us succeed? That's in the versus style.
Yeah.
In an investigative style, that is probably the most complex NPC you're going to be creating because two things. One, their motives might not be entirely above board.
Right.
Number two, if there are many times in an investigative game where the clue is tied to the NPC, and if you lose the NPC for some reason, what do you then do with the clue? Like, how precious are they going to be? You want to make sure they don't have plot armor, however, which we can get into.
Yeah.
And then the third type of like game category is what I call narrative. Narrative is in games like Dogs in the Vineyard, where you have relationships. Burning Wheel is another one. 7th Sea is really, really good at this, where you just go, I have a D6, and this D6 relationship is going to be my father. But my D10 relationship, that is my the person who taught me how to handle a gun, my gunslinger. And every time I call on those relationships, I have them. The other thing is in games that allow you to have complete narrative control, where you just say, well, my uncle happens to run the joint here. He's the mayor of this town that we're going to, very Fabula Ultima, where you're spending some kind of resource and creating that like a narrative type of game.
Right.
So as a GM, you have to understand the game you're playing.
Right.
Intrinsically know what it is that you're going to do. I try not to import mechanics from one game to another game, but I do like taking philosophies from certain games. I have a stack of books here which we can go into. I do like importing philosophies from one game to another to kind of tweak them and help them improve.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I like the idea of like learning from other games' philosophy, like how they think about how an NPC should be treated and how things of that nature should be sort of explored. So, so I think for me personally, I've had a lot of experience with the narrative and versus style, right? Like where I've had the old school D&D, building up your party of hirelings and henchmen and whatever mercenaries, and certainly a lot of narrative games where the like you said, the relationships could even be potentially created, ex nihilo by the party expending some sort of meta resource. Less so on the investigative games, and in particular, as I was saying before, my trope was, when is this NPC going to betray us, right? Like, so I became very gun shy about having NPCs with ulterior motives, or and this maybe kind of sort of goes into a next point, which is, or NPCs, quite frankly, that were in a way more important than the PCs, because I think that's a mistake that we see. You read about that on RPG horror stories all the time.
And we will be getting to that, the expert NPC, when we're talking about pitfalls.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
will be covering that.
Okay, good. So, I mean, that is something where I think the investigative style for me would be a little bit, I'd be concerned, because to your point, if they're vital to the understanding this mystery, suddenly the PCs need the PCs to interact with them, or you need to have something happen. But of course, you don't necessarily want to go down the line of plot armor and fudging.
Yeah, and I will straight out in the middle of a scene, I will tell the player in character, they'll say, look, I'm just an NPC. So you have to come up with the solution and you tell me what you want me to do.
Right.
And then everyone's like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's right. And we'll get into that when we talk about the pitfalls, because you can set up an NPC. And a lot of times campaigns, I'm looking at a shelf of Call of Cthulhu stuff right here. The experts that they go to find to talk to, D&D is also like, has this issue a lot. You're going to hire an expert and you're expecting them to give you the info dump. That is what you are hiring them for. And you have to decide as a GM, like, at what point, where's the game in that?
Right.
How much are you going to gamify that process?
Right. Well, and that also kind of gets to sort of like one of the, I don't want to say drawbacks, but like one of the, I think one of the mistakes that people use with NPCs, which is, it's a person, right? And so to use them mostly as just a plot device to dump exposition isn't really, and if you're wondering why your NPCs are falling flat, well, if your NPCs are just like quest givers and exposition dumps. If there's no counterplay, if there's no back and forth, and that's where I think people fall short a lot of times, is that they make this NPC and they basically make it for the express purpose of getting the PCs from A to B. They trying to get the PCs to the next thing, to do this thing. Now, to be fair, there might be the random blacksmith character in town. You need to repair your armor. That character doesn't need to be anything more than something as in the background. And we can maybe talk about this here, where we talk about, like, how would you categorize your NPCs, right? And I know you have a system there, and I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, that comes in, and when we start talking about the basics of NPCs, we'll talk about, like, how do I handle at the top of a campaign? How do we handle? Because that's where it starts. NPCs are like every single thing that you will cover in a game. When you're talking about the tone of the game, you're talking about the plot of the story. What kind of game are you trying to play? Really, the NPCs, how the NPCs fit into the world, should be part of that session 0 discussion. They shouldn't be left until it's in situ, and then it's like you're just pulling stuff out of your hat, and they're going, "Wait, this is not what I expected."
How deep do you what does that conversation look like?
Okay, cool. So this kind of ties a little bit into the idea of NPCs and narrative beats.
Okay.
And how can you fit them into a story? So anyone who has not read Hamlet's Hit Points, just buy the book already and read it. You'll understand a lot more what I'm talking about. But as you have recently started talking about upbeats, downbeats, and MIDI beats, right?
Mixed beats, yeah.
Mixed beats, yeah. Very similar to that. NPCs allow you to flip those switches. That's really what they're there for, people. They are there to help you facilitate creating interesting narrative beats within a session.
Sure.
So what I like to do, along with session 0, character generation, I use what I call BAN, B-A-N, but it goes by a lot of different names. I call it BAN. It stands for Bystander, Ally, Nemesis. And what happens is when you create your character, it's kind of like the belief system in Burning Wheel a little bit. How you can have a belief like, I'm the rightful king of this country. It doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it narratively true.
Right.
But you believe it's true. So it's a belief that you have, and it's up to you now to prove or disprove that in play. So you have BAN, and this is really working if you have certain kinds of games where they're part of a crew, for tying their backgrounds together, because they can pick the same NPC, multiple characters, and now they're already tied together.
A great suggestion for that are these backstory cards, because if you use the backstory game process, it literally, one of the things is you create 3 or 4 NPCs, and then as you draw these cards randomly, it's showing how the different characters are all connected to that one NPC.
Yeah, and it can get a little kludgy depending on the game. I think Root handles it probably about the best I've ever seen.
Root is very good, and you can go watch our Root session 0 to see how these connections got formed with these different NPCs as we went through the game. Yeah.
So we have these 3 categories of NPCs. The first is your ally. And each player picks for their character someone who is unknown at this point, I don't know who they are, that are their ally. And the ally is a character that will always do their best to help the character out. And a lot of times people end up picking like a family member or something like that as that character. And it works because you think of like, who's always going to be there for you? Who's got your back no matter what? Even if you've done something despicable, they might talk turkey with you, but at the same time, they're there. They're in their corner. They're going to support you. So when you need those kinds of narrative beats, as a GM, you look at that grid that you've set up beforehand, you look at their allies, and you can pluck them out and insert them where needed. Remind the characters their ally exists. Go talk to the ally, and Call of Cthulhu, it might be you talk to your ally, you get some sand back, because that works as like a therapy.
Sure.
Another game, which is like GMing 101, jeopardize what the characters love.
Right. Oh, I love.
You are giving the GM. Go ahead, Derek.
No, I was going to say. So the only time that I've really, and we can kind of talk about this, but like, there have been times where, and usually, I'll be honest with you, it usually happens when we're playing old school D&D, and the group will acquire a group of retainers or henchmen or hirelings, and for whatever reason, and this is in my experience, when the PCs are the ones sort of setting the tone of the relationship, that is when those NPCs become very near and dear to them. And I have seen this happen so many times where they essentially are hiring these people more or less as red shirts, but they end up becoming so paternal towards them or maternal towards them, that when I put those NPCs in the crosshairs, that is almost more frightening to the players than if I were to put their own character in the crosshairs.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
Now, once again, it comes down to the social contract, the expectations you're setting. And when you sit down with a group and you tell them, I want to know that your ally, your bystander, your nemesis, now the players are telling you, this is what my character cares about. They're giving you permission to yoink it around, right? If they've chose their daughter as their ally, it's on them what happens after that.
Right. You shouldn't have brought her into this.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. You're bringing the knife to the gunfight here.
Right.
So that's the one character, the ally. The other character is the bystander. A bystander is a person who kind of straddles the fence between an ally and a nemesis. And we're going to go into what a nemesis is and isn't, because it's very specific. The bystander is someone who you might go to, like in Batman, the Batman movies, there's the Morgan Freeman character you go to get your equipment and stuff. He's not Alfred, but he's this other person that can help you get out of a jam. However, the bystander always wants something in payment. So they're very useful, but they're going to want something in return for it. So it's always a quid pro quo. And this is used to create complications without having to create complications in your story. For example, you're in the town and someone goes, Empire Strikes Back. Perfect example. Lando Calrissian.
Yeah.
Perfect bystander character. If you want to know how to play a bystander, that's a great way to start. Otherwise known as a frenemy, where you need a thing, he's got the thing, but you know you're going to pay for it. Somehow Han knew he was going to pay.
When Lando didn't ask for something, that's when Han knew that something was up, right? Because he should have been trying to get some money or something out of him, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's the bystander. And then the last is the nemesis. Now, nemesis to me is the most interesting of the three. But many times, depending on the kind of game you're playing, it might be the least used. I think in a versus game, you're not going to see it much. And in a narrative game, maybe. I think it's something Fabula Ultima you would, but in many other games you wouldn't. In an investigative game, you're going to see them a lot. So what is a nemesis? A nemesis is a character who is not averse to your character. They are just someone, they're like the agent of chaos. Whenever this character comes up, they complicate the PC's life somehow. Yeah. They turn the world upside down. Perfect example, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Marion.
Oh, interesting.
As soon as Marion enters the picture, what happens? Now she changes, and it goes to show, once again, we're talking about this fluidity, right?
Right. Someone
can...
Right.
Go right ahead.
No, I was going to say, someone could start off as one and transfer to another because of the events of the game. And that's a great way of highlighting, how you playing the game has changed the world, the people, the events in everything. And we talk about player agency a lot. And at the end of the day, player agency is really about, are the things that we're doing changing things for good or for bad? At the end of the day, what's happening is on us. And I think that's like at the heart of player agency.
Yeah, totally. And once again, what are we doing with all this crap? We're creating stories. That's what it is. So you have to look at these NPCs as, this is what the players are telling me the narrative beats they want to hit. For example, in our Star Wars game, which is coming up using WEG Star Wars, one of the characters is playing
the old D6 system, right?
Yeah, is playing the old. Yeah, we're setting it in the Old Republic, and one of them is playing an assassin droid who's been reprogrammed many, many times, so his memory is kind of like a patchwork. And his nemesis is another assassin droid that he's already set up as being better than he is, stronger than he's like the T-1000 to his T-800. And they have some kind of background, which isn't explored yet, but he's out there. And he's come across him a couple of times. That's literally the player telling me, look, I want to have a showdown. I want a climactic fight with this character at some point. And when we get into villains, we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more. But the idea of the nemesis is when I bring that nemesis in, I can flip the switch to create a narrative beat, up or down, or those middle beats, all depending on what you're trying to achieve. And I think that is kind of something some GMs might not consider.
Yeah.
When you start a scene, you should be thinking, how are we going to get out of this scene? what is the end goal? And then what you want to do, it's going to go a little bit into GMing philosophy, but what is drama? What is the story? Someone wants something gets in its way, there's a conflict, and then the outcome of that conflict is what creates a story, whether it's man versus man, man versus technology, man versus nature, blah, 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 blah. The NPCs is your way of doing that in a way that feels very diegetic at the table.
Right. It's emergent from play itself. Yeah. No, and so I couldn't help myself as Ben was saying this. I love that system. Everyone here on this channel knows that I love Blades in the Dark. So when you were saying this just, obviously John Harper, I'm sure has read some of those same sources and has some of that same sort of influence, Ben, as you'd have. But I'm just going to bring this up here on screen real quick. So this is a Blades in the Dark character sheet here. And I'm going to kind of make it a little bit bigger over my face. So when you are making a character in Blades in the Dark, there is, it depends on the character, it depends on the character type, but you have a section called, dangerous friends or, something to that effect. It varies from playbook to playbook. It might say like fellow mad scientists. The fact of the matter is, the idea is all 5 of these NPCs, which in Blades in the Dark are just kind of pre-written on your sheet, but there's no other description beyond that. They are people but you pick one of them that you mark the up arrow, and you pick one of them that you mark the down arrow. And basically, in Ben's terminology, one of them is an ally. The other 3 are bystanders, and then one is a nemesis. They are your Lando. Like, they're not necessarily a villain. They're not trying to, they might be like a professional. It might be like a professional competition where you're both in the assassin racket, and both of you are trying to be the best assassin in Duskwall. And so there's a professional courtesy there, but and you could probably go to them for help because they know you so well. They might even know you better than some of your closest friends, but they're going to create complications and problems in your life. And going to them is always going to be very, very tricky. And then the other 3, like you, Ben, said, yeah, they'll help you, but they want something in return, right? They need something in return. And so, Blades in the Dark basically mechanicizes that and like creates that as part of your character creation process. Just because Blades in the Dark is the kind of game where those NPC creations, those story beats, those narrative moments of, someone, asking for something and they ask for that leads you to the next crazy mission, that leads to the next thing. Those type of things are really necessary, especially if you're playing like a more open world sandbox type game, because you need hooks and motivations in order to sort of, push the story forward, because there's no railroad plot to take you to the next story beat.
Yeah, exactly. And I love playing very open table.
Right.
So the other thing, now we talk about how do you control all of that. I like using mind maps. I use Scapple. I prefer it to having like a flowchart or a grid. But as a GM, you absolutely want to have it in writing, and you want to have it always at your side. That should be with every other table that you're keeping. You want to know these are the main like levers you can pull on during a campaign. You want to keep them close to your side. You have to kind of resist the urge of getting wrapped up in the story or, what the next mission is. You always want to reel it back in, because when you have these like very characterful moments, when they there's a knock at the door, they open the door, and there's the bystander soaking wet from the rain standing there, and they're like, uh-oh.
Right.
Everyone now changes, because what happens is you go from this very wide kind of storytelling, you bring it all the way in. And now you're hyper focusing on, this is my character against that character. And everyone at the table goes, oh, we hate that guy. Or some might go, oh, we love that guy. And some, I hate that guy, but it doesn't matter because he's here now. How are you going to deal with it?
Right.
Super important. You want to keep those NPCs always to the side, so that you always can kind of bring them in, basically when needed, but also players might invoke them.
Right.
The Lando, we're here and I know a guy.
Right. I know a guy. Yeah. Well, and it's funny that you say that, because I think the reason why so many people have problems with NPCs is because most of the time NPCs that they are used to dealing with are these one-dimensional characters, right? That are just basically designed to, in an adventure, right? They're designed to get the party to the next thing, right? They're not really there to do any sort of relationship building. They are just a quest giver. They are just there to push it to the next thing. Because this is something I have personally noticed. And I know, like, I know you want to talk, like, does an NPC require a character sheet and writing things down and having things written down? But I think part and parcel of that is, and I have experienced this myself, there are games or types of games that I play where the nature of the campaign is set up such in a way that players will see and encounter the same NPCs over and over again. It may be every session. It may be every other session. You can imagine if you were playing a sailing ship campaign, right? And there's the grizzled old, master at arms, the sergeant or whatever, or the chef, the ship's cook, right? You're going to have interactions with that character a bunch, but they're on the boat with you, and the boat goes where you go, so you're going to see them a lot. Similarly, there might be, the tavern, your home port that you go to, not every session, but you're always returning to there. That is what really allows people, I think, to make it worthwhile to develop these NPCs and for PCs to feel like this is worth my time. There are so many experiences that so many people are used to, especially with sort of a modular, like an adventure path style play, where you go, I know that this NPC is only going to be here for this adventure, and then we're on to the next thing, and we're never going to see this character again. So I don't care to try to learn them and get to know them and build a relationship with them. I don't want to try to suss out what are their motivations, what are their drives, because it doesn't really matter. And they're going to be on to the next one. And then as a GM, you're going, this doesn't matter. You guys are going to build all these great relationships, and then we're never going to come back to this place ever again. And that could be really, really sad, but that is the way that a lot of things are structured. But when I was playing like Legend of the Five Rings, you have the samurai are part of the daimyo's court, and that is something that they are interacting with again and again and again and again. It gives them an opportunity to really learn these NPCs, what makes them tick. And, we talked about numbers, but in a game like Legend of the Five Rings, you start to learn, this character has a really high water ring and they're susceptible to, fire-based approaches because they're easy to sort of get under their skin. But, and you start to learn them, and then that feels like mastery, right? As you sort of develop that. And that's a great feeling.
And if you want to see your players lose their minds, have it when they come to the tavern, the bartender that they always see, or the tavern keeper, whatever, he's not there.
Not there.
Someone else is there.
Right.
And then they go, okay, so either we're in a weird alternate timeline thing, or what did you do with the guy, or what happened? And then you say, oh, yeah, he had a terrible tragedy happen, or maybe he just has a cold, or whatever the case may be. But those are the little things that kind of add a little bit of realism to the world that you're creating as well, where it's not everyone is always there all the time, the same person. It'd be like, oh yeah, hurry it off because his niece is getting married, you might decide. And then and I've had this happen in our when we were playing Pathfinder 1. One time, the entire session, basically that happened. They needed to get to some high level person, Absalom. And what they ended up doing was befriending his secretary. And she mentioned offhand that her partner for the darts tournament they were going to be in that evening was sick. So the PCs volunteered. So on the spot, I had to design a dart throwing mechanic so they could have this dart competition. And it went to the wire. I think they ended up winning by 1 point. And the PC, like the players, were so into it and they had so much invested that at the end, when they were like, well, we're basically just using this poor girl, at the end they were like, we can't do it.
We felt bad about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get to know somebody and then it feels suddenly very different. And, I remember one of my few instances, and again, I'll talk about what has worked for me in terms of a recipe for success. But like, I talk a lot about, I've been really pro on this channel and games where like, I'm like, PC death, either it's on the table and it can happen, or it's off the table and it can't happen. Don't mix words, right? Don't tell me death can happen, but then it really can't happen, and vice versa. So I'm okay with that. But I've been playing a lot of games, and I've been really into a lot of games where death is sort of an option for the PCs. And I see a lot of people go, well, then where's the challenge of the game? And the fact of the matter is what you were just talking about there is a great example of why NPCs are so important for me, is because I'm playing games where either I can't kill the PCs or, quite frankly, I don't want to kill the PCs. But God help me, I will burn everything around them to the ground. And I promise you, 9 times, because here's the thing, unless you're some sort of psychopath. If a player's character dies, you're going to let them make a new character and you're going to let them play in the campaign. You're going to try to bring them in some way. Either there's going to be some sort of catch-up mechanic, or in many games, they're the same level, right? New character, everything's the same. But if that NPC gets killed, or is taken prisoner, or is otherwise cursed or something like that, they don't have that not even like plot armor of the PCs, but the fact that the PCs are ultimately controlled by real human beings. You can throw these things into the wood chipper, and as a result, I've had players who respond far great, like, oh, we got into a fight. 2 of my PC allies died. Yeah, we will. We'll honor their loss. It's fine. We'll. When we go to town, I start keeping my eye out. Is there any new dwarf barbarians that happen to be looking in town? But when an NPC dies, they react. And so NPCs, for me, when the players build that connection, that is how I'm able to leverage, emotional blackmail essentially onto my party. And so that has been super critical. And there was an instance and a time in 4th edition D&D where Aaron Smith's character, William Brandis, had become a great king of men. And when he was just starting out, a young drow from a city that they had saved, and then the drow were inspired, and this small group of drow made their way to the surface. And this kid was like a young drow who was his squire. And he kind of grew up in his shadow. We had a time leap, 20, 30 years into the future. And now he was the general, or the commander of his armies. And in the final couple sessions, everybody kind of had to go off to a different part of the world to deal with some threat. And he knew that this guy was an NPC and he needed him to go do this thing, but he knew he was sending him to his death, basically. There was no chance that it was a rear guard action, right? He wasn't going to win. And it was just killing him, because he was like, I care less about my own character. I care less about my fellow PCs dying than I do about this character, because I feel like it's an NPC, but in a weird way, I feel like it's my PC.
Yeah,
it's my NPC.
It's basically using an NPC as a resource.
Yes. Yeah.
But as a narrative resource, not as just a set of modifiers that you can add onto something, where it actually becomes something that if they lose it, not having is more important than having it.
Right.
Or having is more important than losing it. And what is it? It's the relationship. It's the idea of that continuity, that there's always some place when you have these heroes, right? These adventurers are bouncing around all the time. Some sense of actual normalcy is so important to the game, where you have these moments of normalcy. So it's especially at low level, before they get too powerful and they're saving the universe, is it's Tuesday kind of a thing.
Right.
Kind of having those more normal beats where things kind of can tone down, they get more on a personal level, and then you can expand it out again, coming back and forth. That's kind of where the rubber hits the road with a lot of NPCs. I have one story kind of like yours, which I will go into really quick, which was Call of Cthulhu. They were on a ship bound from New York to Southampton, England. The ship ran into, a mythos thing. It was going down. It turns out that there were not enough lifeboats on this ship, just similar to what happened in real life. And this wasn't the Titanic, but it's very similar
situation. Yeah.
And all the PCs were either underwater or in lifeboats already. Hey, bud. Say hi to the people. You're live on YouTube.
Wait, this is live?
Yeah. I told you I was on a call. Okay, bye, bud.
See,
sorry about that.
See, and it's an NPC.
he's an NPC. To you, he's an NPC.
Right.
So the ship's going down, but all of the artifacts and the notes and everything they had that was important was on the ship still. And there was an allied NPC, a reporter from the New York Times, that was still on the ship. And she only had 40 luck. And so they were like, oh, man. So they're yelling to her, you have to get the stuff and then get on a boat. And like, all right, I'm going to make it a luck roll. There's only a 40% chance that she's going to make it. And honestly, I think that is even too much. I really feel like this is like a 20% chance that she's going to be able to go to the stateroom with the ship it's listing, get the stuff, and then somehow finagle her way onto a lifeboat. And we rolled, and she passed. She outright passed. And they were just like, yes. So then later on, PS, a couple months later, now they've gone through England. They make it out. They go to Cairo. She's still there, still with the group. One of the characters is really starting to spiral downward now, and he gets super paranoid, and he basically starts accusing her of being like a body double or something like that. And I was just in character, was able to turn that around and be like, where were you when the ship was going down? And where the stuff happened, like you're questioning me. I
Right.
can tell you things about you you don't even know.
Right.
And it really took the player back for a second. He's like, "Whoa, what do you mean the person? I'm just talking in character. Don't worry about it."
Right. Yeah, no, like, I mean, again, I think that making that emotional connection is something that NPCs can, I think, do more so than any other thing that we have, because environments can be cool. And I think locations are very important, and people can certainly be like, wow, that's kind of cool. And I really like this town. I really like this place. But as human beings, right, we are used to building and bonding with fellow human beings or other sentient creatures. So, I think that's where, as a GM, we can leverage NPCs to sort of, kind of pull a tug at those heartstrings. So let's talk specifics here, because you've mentioned a couple of times, like, some of the stuff that you're writing down. So, like, what do you have, for NPCs? Like, what are you writing down?
All right. So if we're talking about what we would all consider the bog standard NPC, they go into town and they talk to X about Y. And that's all that we know. First thing is, what I like to do for prep is have a list of names. So
Absolutely.
If you're in England, if you're in Cairo, if you're in Paris, or, that's very different. Or if you're in the Dwarven city or the Elven town, or, the human fortification, but it's got a Norse vibe to it, or everyone's got names that are Finnish. Make sure you kind of have the names already put aside if you can. I'm famous for also forgetting to do this, but I try to have a list of names.
I want to take a moment, because I want to reiterate something about this. Number one of the principles of Dungeon World is give every NPC a name. And it doesn't mean literally every NPC, but the idea is, if you refer to a character as, oh, it's the guy, I promise you, your party is they hear, oh, that's not important, right? When something has a name, something is important. So we pay attention. So if you want those relationships between your party members and the NPCs, you got to give them names. Number two, I've been doing this a long time. Ben's been doing this a long time. And you know what? I don't trust myself to just come up with good names on the fly. I always have a list on my GM screen. I always have a printed out random. Yep, there. Literally. That I think that is from Gary Gygax's Extraordinary Book of Names, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. I use it often.
I use it often as too. That is a fantastic resource. I recognized it immediately. All right. This is it. This game, this book here, I'm sure you can get in a digital copy. This is gold. I mean, this has, especially because it has not only your dwarven elvish stuff, but as Ben was saying, it has different cultures. And so when I was playing Legend of the Five Rings, and I am not a Japanese major or anything like that, and I need to come up with a Japanese name or a Japanese style name, it is far easier and, dare I say, better for me to go to this book and suddenly pull out names that are, Japanese, like Akira and Atasuki and Chihiro and Kojiro, because, well, that's good. And so anyways, point is, names are important, and use a list, use a random number or generator. There's all over the internet. I like Gary Gygax's Extraordinary Book of Names. So
yeah, I like having a physical list that I can cross off.
Right. The other thing I was going to say, generally speaking, is whether you're creating names or even picking names, I try to make them, somewhat memorable, somewhat like it should be easy to remember. Yes, like, oh, that guy's name is Tao Chu Cha Chu. Like, it's like, okay, they're never going to remember that. And inevitably they're going to give him some sort of silly nickname, right? Like they're going to call him Tao Lee or something. So just save yourself the trouble, unless you're fine with that. And that might be a good thing. I like to go with simple, 2-syllable, just very boom, boom, make it easy. Anyways.
Yeah, I often also sabotage myself when I'll say a name and I'm like, actually it sounds like something else. And then I'll come up with a stupid nickname, and then that's the name that will stick, because it's like, oh, he sounds like he's like Joe Tylenol, and then they're like, oh, so Joe Tylenol, forget it. From then on, that's the character.
Now, to be fair, it's a lingua franca. We played one big mega campaign, and there was a character at the bottom whose name was, there were 4 great mages that inhabited this dungeon, and one of them was named Folain the World Weaver. And he basically was an elven Doctor Who, because he had a interdimensional time ship, and anyways. And so they just started calling him Time Elf. That was his name. No one even remembered what his name was. But everybody knew who Time Elf was. And so while it wasn't ideal and certainly not for your like dramatic, super critical role style game, the fact of the matter is it worked for my purposes, which is we all know who we're talking about and you all have a certain connection with him. So it worked.
Yeah, but it's totally real. For example, we have neighborhood characters, like people in our neighborhood. Then we've have nicknames for everybody, right? It's Joe Small Dog. We have a woman who is walks around the neighborhood, call her Traveling Lady. That's normal that you would have these names. I don't know her real name, but anytime I mention to anyone about Traveling Lady, they know exactly who I'm talking about. So that's step one.
Step one, name.
The name. And then if I don't know the character at all, and this is the tricky part, I will use Conjecture Games Universal NPC Emulator, which has 2 tables that you roll on. One is NPC modifier and then a noun. So if it's a patron, they might meet at a tavern. You know, they can be a despondent sailor or whatever the case may be. The key is once you roll that personality type, stick to it. And then sometimes you have to do a little bit of mental gymnastics. You know, like we had one character in our AD&D campaign. I rolled nefarious, and I'm like, man, how could he be nefarious but still be like not evil at the same time? So you start stretching those definitions and you'd be shocked how much you can get out of 20 words when you just start expanding their definitions a little bit. And then once I have that, if you want, there is another table on here. It shows their R value or their relative value to the party. Are they higher level or lower level? Are they more powerful or less powerful?
Okay.
And that can give you an idea of their station or perhaps their influence as well. If you're playing a game where the level doesn't matter, but you walk into the magic shop and you roll the thing and it's like, wow, this guy rolled, it's way higher. It's like, yeah, it's like real opulent. You could tell you can't afford anything here. This is way too high end for you. Right. You're starting to create a little bit of those hooks that you have.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
If it is a character that I know is going to be a villain, however, that's a little bit different. And that's almost like a separate category that we'll need to get into.
Right. Because then you definitely need more stats from me. Now, so for me, as I was saying before, I like to, historically, I used to use I've talked about this before. I think what are some of Derek's most, go-to books. AEG had this book called Toolbox, an Ultimate Toolbox, and they have some really great just NPC personalities. So it's like, I just roll it and it's like a quirk. It's a personality. Think of it like a demeanor, right? That being said, if I want more detail, and I'm not talking about like combative details, is I will basically create a SWOT, right? Strength, weakness, opportunity, threat. Because if I want a little bit more detail, strength is, what is this character good at, right? What can it bring to the party? Weakness, what is this character bad at? Opportunity is, and how can this, what is a opportunity that this NPC can give to the party, or what is an opportunity that this NPC represents? And then the threat, right? What's the trouble? What's the downside? Think in terms of Blades in the Dark. Think, what happens if I roll a 1, 2, or 3? Or what happens if I'm playing Power of the Apocalypse and I roll a 6-? Well, that's a great thing that you can go, oh, this character's great. They can help us. They can do this. Oh, but they're wanted for gambling debts, right? That's the threat, right? And so by using that matrix of strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, I find that, and there's some games that kind of include that in a certain weird way, like Legend of the Five Rings, an NPC has a Giri and an Injo, right? Which is their sworn loyal duty and their personal feeling. So I like to know what the NPCs want, because I think if you don't know what the NPC wants, if what the NPC wants is, I'm going to sound like a play-by-post person here, but like if the NPC is just a framework to get to the next part of the adventure, then the party's never going to respond well to them. The NPC kind of has to have their own personality, their own desires, their own motivations, to the point where you go, yeah, no, like what I really need for this NPC to do is this, but I don't think that's what this NPC would do. I think this NPC would take the party in this direction, and that'll make the NPC feel more believable and more real.
And you want to be very careful that you don't let the NPC become the shortcut,
right,
for the players to achieve the end. This is where we kind of come to the problem with the expert NPC. Oh, first of all, do I think NPC should have a character sheet? No.
Yeah.
I never use one, and in fact, my villains which we'll get into talking about villains because they're kind of a separate category. I won't make any stats for them until I absolutely have to, and then I make sure that I overtune them, but for a very specific reason. They're always overtuned. There's no way the heroes, generally speaking, in any story ever beat their nemesis or the main villain the first time they come up against them. This is how stories are told. It's just the way it goes.
So, okay, side tangent to the future tangent. Does that mean you really like Ultima points from Fabula Ultima then? Because isn't that it's a way to like hard code that, right?
Yeah. I like a lot about Fabu. I haven't run it yet. That's happening in January. So I can't say until actually it's at the table. But conceptually, I like a lot of things about how it handles, how it gamifies a lot of those aspects of it. I have to play it and see how I feel about it.
Because we'll get to that when we get to that. But I'm pretty sure I agree with Ben, which is that 99% of campaign villains aren't actually, in my opinion, meet the definition of villains simply because you meet them once and they die. And that you can't, terrible. They can't be a villain if they just die. They just, it's impossible. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. And that's like a whole category of NPC.
Right.
But I generally don't stat out NPCs at all. I have no desire to. If they are a hireling or a henchman, that's something else. You have to kind of know the numbers there, but so take it with a grain of salt. Depends on the system that you're playing. You do need to know the basic.
Going back to
abilities.
Your style, if it's more of that versus style play where this is going to be a combatant, then you probably need an armor class and and hit points and all that other stuff.
And I still will be completely random, and sometimes the players totally luck out because I just use Rogue's Gallery for AD&D, for example, and I just roll on the table. I'm like, oh, well, great, you have a level 4 thief who just joined the party to help you out, and they're like, woohoo! And just the way it goes, I really don't sweat stuff like that in my game. It really doesn't bother me. I'm not looking to fine tune everything down to like this nth degree of symmetry and balance.
Right.
It's just, if it tells a more interesting story, I'll always lean in that direction.
Now, to that end, this is something that I feel very strongly about, and I'll be completely honest with you. It's something that it keeps me from using NPCs, especially NPCs in the party. I have become maybe overly obsessed with the idea that the PCs are the most important characters in the world, to me, to the game, to the story. And I like it. It could be a failing of mine, which is that I never want an NPC to show up the PC. And, I think history is, replete with examples of the Mary Sue GMPC, the character that's just good at everything and is so much better than the party, and the party needs this NPC. Really, if you think about it, the NPC is the main character, and the party is just sort of, following along. There's a weird way that I think about Lord of the Rings sometimes, where I think about Lord of the Rings is if you were playing Lord of the Rings in a real sense, it would be that you were playing Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, and Boromir, and then there would be these 4 NPC hobbits, which kind of suck, and they're much lower level, and they're weaker, but one of them has some pretty twinked gear and is the most important character because he's the ring bearer. But in a weird way, it's like, that's a weird paradigm because the most important character isn't one of the PCs. And so I struggle with this myself because in the sense that I avoid it completely because I do not want to make, I don't want to have my NPC come in and save the day or make, or look better than the PCs.
So there are a couple things about that. Number one, Lord of the Rings absolutely is an escort mission. I mean, that's how it starts.
Right.
It really is what it is. It's couched with all this other stuff, but if you're looking at it as a game, it would be an escort mission.
It would be an escort mission.
I wouldn't want to be a hobbit in that case. They have all the disadvantages, except they're incorruptible. It's the only thing that they have going for them. Otherwise, they suck.
Right.
So,
but that's why you bring them, right? Because they've got the longer corruptibility tracks, so you don't have to worry about it corrupting you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can hold on to that ring. I fight ring wraiths. So there's that aspect of it, and then we start talking about. So there's a very thin line between the allied NPC and the GMPC or the DMPC. There's that thin line, and it ties how I use them ties directly to the type of game. So in a versus game, where you have hirelings and henchmen, where I'm playing their personalities, but the characters are controlling the character. Otherwise, I don't say what their attacks are or anything like that. They are telling me what the character is doing, and I am only taking control of the character when they are out of a conflict. versus a narrative game where you have NPCs where everything is being driven by the players, and you don't really have that line anymore. It almost doesn't exist really, because everyone is a GMPC or not in some games, right?
Right.
But in investigative games, it's very, very important to have capable, knowledgeable allied NPCs. Why? And I'm talking about Call of Cthulhu here specifically, I should add. The PCs are not going to be long for this earth. This is a fact. You must have those successions ready to go. Having an allied NPC that's been with them from New York all the way to Cairo, and then when the character buys it, like we just had 2 characters die in the last session we played right before the holidays, now there is someone that could easily take over. It's already there. It's just they slot in, and it's a temporary thing. They play the NPC until either that NPC dies, or they introduce another character in a more naturalistic way, and then they spin the NPC back into my control again.
And and that gets back to that fluidity that you talked about trusting your players, to control NPCs and to maybe have NPCs almost kind of go in and out of either full PC status or sort of like quasi PC status, say like in a combat.
And here's the thing, and this is something that Trevor Duvall from Me, Myself, and Die talks about a lot, and something I have quite honestly been very afraid to do, and am going to actively try and do it next year. And that is when there's a scene that has 1 player character or 2 player characters, but you have 6 players and there's NPCs, giving that NPC to the other players and telling them this is what the character wants. That's all they need to know.
Yep.
This is their motivation and their basic personality. You hand it to the player and go. And that is a trust issue.
Right.
You really have to know your players and know that they are not going to tank the ship when that happens.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because when you this happens all the time when you play a game like Fiasco. Because in Fiasco, every player has their main character in the story, but Fiasco isn't always, and all 6 of you are in the scene every single time. It doesn't work that way. It's supposed to be almost like a movie montage. And so, it might be me and Ben in a scene with our characters for the Fiasco session, but then we're like, you be the nosy cashier. And it's like, okay. And you kind of assign these roles really quickly, and people kind of get to take they take their main character and they set them aside, and then they hop into that role. Now in Fiasco, I find that people embrace this willingly. I mean, amazingly. In fact,
well, you're all trying to screw each other over.
Yeah, you're all trying to screw
anyway.
each other. But it's my understanding. I was too drunk and I passed out. But it's my understanding that at last year's Origins, this last summer, there was a group that got together, including Stephen Glicker from Roll for Combat, Aaron Smith, and Alyssa from Night's Last Call, and along with a bunch of patrons from Night's Last Call, who got together and played a Fiasco game. One of our patrons, Sean, showed up late, so he wasn't able to be a character. But he basically ended up being like the 7th man and just like slotting in as an NPC in like a bunch of different scenes. And in a way, he became everybody's favorite character because he was just bringing so much fun and life to it. But it was essentially an NPC. He didn't have a PC. He only had an NPC. So I find that people really embrace that in Fiasco, and it can be a lot of fun. But I do know that there's a lot of people I've encountered who are very hesitant to, take themselves out of the role of their one singular PC.
Yes.
And even as go so far as to control multiple characters at once. I find that there's a lot of people who have a very bad reaction to that.
You have to, like everything else we're saying here, folks, talk to your group.
Sure.
Don't give commandments from on high. This is the way it's going to be. This is before the session starts, like in my case, it'll be the new year and we get together for Call of Cthulhu, where I could see this working out really well and saying, guys, this is something I'm thinking about doing. What do you think about this idea? And some players might go, yeah. Another player will be like, yeah, be fine. So if the players that are willing to onboard it, why not? Why not? And it kind of gives them a taste of that GMing ability a little bit. Like,
Yes.
here you go. Now you get 2 words. Go.
Yeah.
Create a scene. Let's see how you like it.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's a way of almost giving players that sort of declarative narrative control without going the full heavy-handed, meta currency fate point. Because you're saying, look, no, like this is a GM controlled character. You're just sort of stepping in for a moment and helping out. And I also think that really helps because, look, I respect everybody's time. I respect everybody at the table. I want to include everybody. I want everybody to be able to participate, but maybe it just really doesn't make sense that your characters are in this scene. Maybe half of you, you split the party and half of you go left and half of you go right. Half of you go to warn the king and the other half of you go to try to stop the ritual. And, you Lord of the Rings it, right? Where like everybody goes off and does their own thing. And it's like, okay, well then who are you playing? You were playing the Gandalf character. But now it's Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn in Rohan. So who are you playing? And it's like, I'll be Eomer, or I'll be King Theoden, right? And it's kind of like, oh, okay, that works. And I think that's...
Or even let them play the orcs.
Sure.
And just, it could be fun. You're playing, okay, they're going to try and stop you in this scene. And then, it works good in games where there are a lot of dice. I wouldn't do this in a narrative game where everyone has just too much control, but where it's like more randomized. Yeah. Why not have someone play the orc that's defending the door and then the 2 thieves are trying to get past him? Why not?
Right.
And it's just something, honestly, I haven't really thought about doing. And it's something that when I heard about it from Trevor, I was really kind of like, man, I don't know if I like that. And I thought, do I not like it or am I just afraid to do it?
Right. Usually it's one and the same, right? Like if you're afraid to do something, it's because you're like, it's probably something you should be doing, right? Because
just give it up, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Maybe with some groups it'll be great, other groups it'll suck. But you're not going to try until you actually do it. So that's going to be one of my goals for next year. But there's that difference of like, where does an allied NPC turn into your Mary Sue? Where's the self insert of the GM in the game? I think that in an investigative game, you need to have some self-inserts in there because unless you're playing Gumshoe, where they can spend a point and get a clue.
To get the clue,
kind of a thing. If you're playing a real investigative game,
guess
what? Well, the thing is, you're not playing with people that do investigations for a living, so they don't know how to go about this stuff.
Listen, I am not an investigative fan. We've talked about this before, but I don't hate the premise of Gumshoe because part of my concept is like, I'm terrible at puzzles and mysteries. I would be terrible at this game. Like, give me.
So create that environment for them.
Yeah.
Is what I like to do. But you need to know why you're doing it.
Yeah.
You have an allied NPC, and what's funny is in Call of Cthulhu, which I think is a very important role to have, I still check the players. Every time we hit like a major story beat, like a chapter closes, I go, look, do you still want so-and-so around? I can find a way of making them leave or have something else to do and take them out of play if you feel they're coming too far forward. And it's very important that you check with your players regularly about stuff like that, because you never want them to think at any point in time you are telling a story, like it's my story, so to speak. You already have all the cards. You already have too much stacked in your favor.
Yeah. I mean,
the players.
I'm all about divesting stuff and handing it to other players. But for me, Blaze in the Dark, John Harper has a great thing where he says, look, like he basically says in his book, there's a trope in a lot of heist movies where the gang does the heist and then they realize that they got double crossed. And when they get back to their lair and they open up the briefcase, all the money's gone. It was a dupe, and they got nothing. They risked everything and they got nothing. He's like, that's a classic thing in heist. He goes, but don't do it in a role-playing game. And of course, obviously he's being a bit heavy-handed there, but by and large, I agree with I agree with that because it's different. It's not a novel. It's not these impersonal characters on screen. It's not you sort of passively observing. You were there actively doing it, and to not be rewarded is pretty bad. Right.
But here's the question.
Yeah.
When you give that NPC over to a player, are they still an NPC?
Right. Well, and that's what I was going to say is that for me, another sort of unspoken rule, and I get in fiction and movies and quests and video games, there's always this idea of like, oh, this NPC, they're the important one. They're the one that needs to go on, right? We're just the meat wall, like we're just the shepherds, we're just the escorters. And that's a fine trope. But for me personally, it's not one that I think you should be using in games because I want the focus and the attention to be on the players. So to your question, what happens when a player takes over the an NPC? And I would say, I don't know, because I want the player to feel like they are the ones who are controlling things. I don't really technically care about their player character, right? So I guess I would be okay with that as long as it's a player.
Yeah. Now that I've come to terms with the idea,
yes,
I've reached the acceptance, that 7th step of acceptance. I'm ready to let it go.
Yeah.
I am fine with letting the chips fall where they may in the scene. And fortunately, I play by and large. I have many groups, many players. They're a good bunch. They're a mature group.
Yes.
They will know how to handle what I'm giving them. I'm giving them the car, keys to the car,
yes,
and having them drive it. I don't think anyone's going to drive it into a pole.
Right. I will say this. I think a lot of the stuff that you and I are talking about right now is not something you should do if it's someone's first time playing the game. Right.
Not with a group of randos. Absolutely not.
Right. But if you have this trust, because, Golda Cat said something here. He said, players almost always make encounters more enjoyable for everyone. They deliberately will handicap themselves in fun ways, and the victory can feel like a shared experience. And I think they're absolutely correct, which is, it's one of the reasons why I love old school, classic dungeon design. The players get to pick, what their level of risk is. Do we want to just go to an upper level of the dungeon and kind of have a cakewalk, or do we want to try to go real deep and get the really good treasure, but potentially be fighting basilisks and medusas that could turn us to stone instantly? That choice is on us. I think Golda Cat is right, where if the players are the ones playing the NPCs, they're going to push it to the level that they are comfortable pushing it. They're not going to no one's going to say, oh man, that's so unfair. It's like, well, no, you were the one who had the NPC do that. And they're like, yeah, no, I guess you're right.
Yeah. And where it comes in really handy is in a game, like speaking of Golda Cat, our shared love of Burning Wheel, where in order for your character to advance, you have to face challenges of varying difficulty. And what's better than having them go against a really tough challenge and giving that opposition to another player? How much fun is that? Because the player already knows they're likely going to fail. It's the point of the game. It's baked into the game. You know you're probably going to fail. But now you're giving that extra little spice to it by giving that to another player at the table to then actively be that opposition. It could create some really, really interesting moments for the right group.
Right.
That's already discussed this and vetted it out, and you're fully aware of what you're getting into when you do that kind of a thing. I think that's kind of like one of the last frontiers for me.
Yeah.
Gaming. It's one of the few things I have yet to actually try.
Not in a long time, but I used to do that all the time in combat. If a character died or was otherwise rendered essentially out of the combat early, and, these are players I've played with, if Smith's character got crit and dropped in the first round or whatever like that, or even died, I'd be like, all right, here, buddy, you play the orcs. They're at initiative 13, and he's like, all right, let's go get them. And so
we had,
it was like us teaming up against the party.
So we had one of the first games I ran for the Discord was a Pathfinder 2 game called The Trouble with Owlbears. And we had 9 or 10 people show up for that session. And what they didn't know was, I set everything up so they were going after an owlbear, but it turned out the owlbear was actually being misused by these wraiths. And the wraith was dropping the PCs left and right. And Donnie was the person who was now controlled by the wraith. And I said, look, I don't want to control your character. He's like, no, I got this. And he was just attacking all the other PCs. It was so much fun watching that chaos kind of unfurl. None of them were expecting this. I don't recommend doing something like that.
Pierre,
at that point, I think a lot of people didn't really know my play style that well.
Right. Pierre said, yeah, that was very early on. Yeah, Pierre's like, I remember that. We got so annihilated. This reminds me of a campaign I had where there was an event. I can't exactly how it remembers, but long story short, the party was attacked, and it turns out they had been attacked by a group of doppelgangers, and there was kind of a there was like a brief moment of uncertainty, and everything else was like they were like, okay, it's fine. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. At the end of the session, I took one of the players aside and I said, hey, listen, you were taken. You are now a doppelganger. And he goes, oh, okay. And I'm like, just to make it easy, I'm not going to like give you new stats. They're really good doppelgangers. So you can keep playing your dwarf ranger, but your goal is going to be to lead the party down to level 3 and get the staff of the woodlands or whatever, the staff of the dark woods. And that's what you're going, and you're going to basically use the PCs as patsies and get them to do it for you. And then your doppelganger buddies are going to ambush the party after they're done fighting the big, huge defensive beasts, massacre them all, and then take the staff and their treasure off of their dead corpses. And he was like, I'm in. Not one session, not two. It was like 4 sessions that he played as this traitor in the midst. And he said it was like the best thing that he's ever done. Yeah. And he played it so beautifully. And like when the betrayal came, everyone turned and they're like, when? They're like, wait a second, that was like a month ago in real time. And it's like, I've been a doppelganger the whole time.
Yeah.
And that was awesome.
Those are moments where you got to know your group really well.
Right.
And I've done similar things like that. And the same reaction, everyone just has a good laugh about it. And they're like, oh man, we didn't see that coming. But however, that's a one-way ticket. Right. So if anyone out there in YouTube land gets a bolt of inspiration from it, that's a once time. Right. You probably can't even do it in 2 campaigns with the same group. That is a one-shot deal. Right. But it's great for that one time.
And that's what I was saying earlier about once bitten, twice shy, right? Like I used to have NPCs that would betray the party all the time. And again, your game and your type, maybe if you're playing the Call of Cthulhu game, maybe it's a little different. But in your standard heroic fantasy game, I say do not do it. Just don't do it. I know it's a trope. People betray people. I don't do it because I think that it just breaks the trust. And it's so hard to get people engaged. Now, maybe if you have a really mature group and they're really good with it, but it's like when you play Diplomacy, all right, the board game. And the idea is that each game is a completely new game. I'm England, you're Turkey. Don't worry about last game where I brutally betrayed you so that I could win. And it's like, I can't, man. I know that this is a different game, but it's still you. Yeah. And I still remember that game. And so that is going to carry on, even though it shouldn't. And so my advice first and foremost is, speaking of expert NPC, make the NPCs helpful, make the NPCs, true allies, but don't make them so good that they overshadow the PCs and don't make them, so nefarious and so, whatever, unless the PCs already, that's an expected thing, if the PCs go,
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I was gonna say, if the PCs go, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, that's fine because they knew it was coming.
Yeah. And don't let the players use them to shortcut the game, but at the same token, that's what your bystanders are for and your nemesis are for. You have nemesis. These are characters they're expecting to already. And this is kind of, you have to remember, at the end of the day, you're playing a game.
Right.
We're sitting down and there's a meta context and there is a social contract that we have. And we agree. And I tell this to all my players, especially in AD&D. I go, look, I am here. It's your campaign. I'm here just to facilitate what you want to do 100%. But if we roll for initiative, it's not the orcs against them. It's me against you. And I'm going to play the game as well as I can to defeat you, the player.
Right.
And everyone's on board with that. Right. And they know that is an expectation going into it. You can't do that with every game. You can't do that with every situation. It really depends on so many of those little factors. You really need to know your players, know what they're expecting. And in the beginning, like if a lot of these concepts are new to you, I would say just try one of the ideas, see how it works, and then expand it, spin it out. Because I've been doing this 43 years. So, what's very natural second nature for me is not going to be second nature for someone else.
Yeah. So, so long story short, I think, I think as a GM, you need to be less precious about your NPCs, right? In the sense that you should not be designing them to be the main character. You should not be designing them to be the linchpin of the adventure. And if you are, maybe reconsider. And ultimately, the thing that is the most important thing about an NPC, and Ben has alluded to this all night, is what is their connection to the PCs? The NPC is just another way for you as the GM to portray the world around you. And so if you want an NPC to show, the party how this town operates and you want to give it a personality and a place, then you're going to create an NPC for that. But you're doing that to sort of highlight and show and showcase an element of the world. But if you want the party members to care about that character, then that NPC needs to be able to do something for them. It needs to be able to help them because there is the context that Ben was talking about for most people. It's a game. What's the quid? What can you do for me, right? What's the quid pro quo? Like the NPC doesn't have to be boiled down to, it's +2 to shopping, +1 to fighting. This is the NPC has 3 boxes of usefulness. Like it doesn't have to be boiled down to that much of a discrete component. But at the end of the day, players are kind of very utilitarian in their approach to a lot of games. It's like, hey, I got this magic item because I need this magic item to help me do this thing. Oh, there's an NPC. What can they help me with? But you can cook them because they go to the NPC because they need something or they want something, and you can help them without stealing the spotlight. But you can also start to prey on their human weaknesses and start to build those connections and tug on those heartstrings, right? And before you know it, the players suddenly have an unbalanced relationship with this NPC where they care about the NPC, even maybe though they shouldn't. And now you have a new lever that you can twist and pull and stab to really mess with your PCs.
Yeah. That's a great summary.
So one thing that you said at the beginning was the difference between a nemesis and a villain. And I know you have some thoughts on that, and I want to make sure we cover it because to me, this is very, very interesting stuff.
Yes. So developing a villain. So what is a villain?
Right.
What is a villain? We have Tome of Adventure Design is a great book on creating villains. This is the person that is the ultimate person behind all the plots and schemes and veils and things that the characters will spend sessions, weeks, months, maybe even years finally coming up against. So the difference between a villain and a nemesis is the nemesis is someone that your character knows. A villain might be someone they don't know. In all likelihood, the villain is not someone they know. And I prefer it when it's not someone they know right away.
Gotcha.
That it slowly comes through play, the villain. And I play all of my games end up being very highly geopolitical, high intrigue type of games. It's just what I just bring to my games normally because they run very slow. I'm a slow running GM. The sessions tend to be kind of drawn out and very heavy with who can you trust, who you cannot trust,
right? Kind
of a thing. And I think part of it's just because I live in New York, so it's kind of baked into the world here, right, where it's just, we're not a very trusting people.
I'll say this, I've made complaints on this channel before about the structure of a lot of common adventure paths because, you oftentimes will, you'll maybe vaguely hear about a villain or maybe not even really be aware of who the villain is until, and this is more of in a D&D Pathfinder sense, until you kick in the door, and then it's a fight, and then you have either two options, which are both horrible. One is the villain monologues and tells you their whole backstory, why I was doing this, and I was abandoned as a child, and I was doing this, and I was trying to get revenge on the town that left me, and you're like, is this happening while we're kicking in the door, or what is going on here? And also, I don't care. We're about to fight the big boss of this adventure. I'm worried about my hit points. Or two, they say nothing and they fight to the death. And then you learn about them in like a post-credit scene, right? From a journal or from a letter. You can't, in my mind, you can't be a villain if the party doesn't have a relationship with you, right? That doesn't make any sense to me. Darth Vader is a villain because from the beginning he's hunting them and they know who he is, and then he almost gets Luke and then he's chasing them across and they know who it is. It's the Empire, but it's personalized as Darth Vader.
But even then, Vader's just the tip of the iceberg.
Sure.
Because the Empire there's the Emperor himself. Right. Now it goes to like a whole new layer where you thought, if we get rid of Vader, then everything is good.
Right. You can always upgrade.
You realize, Vader is as powerful as he is still on the strings of someone else.
And I think that's important to note as well. It's not like the people in the Galactic Republic don't know that the Empire has an emperor. they may not have like, when I say a personal relationship, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, we were best friends in high school. No. But like, they're like, the Emperor destroyed my planet, right? Like maybe it wasn't even him personally, but like you personally have maybe it's a very one-way relationship, but you have a thing that says this guy I know who he is, or I know who she is, or I know who they are. And I have a problem with them. And they have either directly or indirectly or on purpose, or they didn't even know I existed, right? They have been stymieing me, and they have been destroying what I care for, and they have been trying for a long time. And so this relationship is built up, even if you've never sat down and had a cup of coffee with them. And I think that is what's so important.
Yeah. So the thing I'm not a huge fan of with things like Tome of Adventure Design is that when you know who the villain is, right? You know who the main villain is. It's really hard not to steer the players towards it, or to maybe tip your hand a little too early. I'm the kind of player or GM, depending on the system, but most times, even if it's kind of like a campaign or whatever, I don't even want to know what's going to happen in the next hour,
right?
Personally. So I don't want to know these things. And I opt for, there are two different ways to do it. I view one as what I call the Lost approach, and the other is what I call the X-Files approach.
Okay.
Lost was pre-done, scripted, beginning to end. They already knew what was going to happen from episode 1 to episode whatever. And then it ends in whatever. Whereas X-Files, they didn't know what was going to happen next. So Chris Carter just kept throwing seeds and then be like, oh, now there's the smoking man who's in the background of one shot. He's nothing. And then people started theorizing about the smoking man. He's like, oh, there's an NPC. Let's bring him up. And then what happens? Now he becomes a villain. He started as maybe he definitely was Mulder's nemesis, right? Almost a bystander. And then you learn how close he was to Mulder as the story goes on.
Right.
But those reveals weren't planned by Chris Carter. Sure. They just slowly evolved. He had no idea going one episode of the next or season of the next what was going to happen. So you could totally do that. But one thing you want to make sure is the villain has to have ongoing plots and schemes. Now, 7th Sea, which is this game, 2nd edition. If you're a GM and you don't own this game, shame on you. Because this has really great philosophies. Once again, I don't like stealing mechanics, but the philosophy of what villains are and how do we tell stories? How do you portray a villain as a GM? Someone who is dead set against the PCs and wants them dead, right? How do you portray that? They have plots, they have schemes. These plots and schemes should grow over time. And once the characters become aware of the villain should continue to grow in stature or in strength. And the PC should start feeling that pressure a little bit, like, oh man, now it's a race against time to go after them. Forge in the Dark does this very well with clocks. I'm not a huge fan of clocks overall, but the concept of it is basically the same.
Right. Dungeon World, or Power of the Clocks calls them fronts, right? The idea that there is this master plan, this great doom that is to come, and there's 3 steps along the way. There's 5 steps along the way. I need to do A, B, C, and D, and then I'll achieve them. Yeah. Yep.
And you don't have to pre-plan them, but you want to make sure that if you know a plot starts forming in your head, like, okay, they met with the shopkeeper, and I know the shopkeeper is in the villain's pocket, or he belongs to this organization that's going to sell that information to the villain. Make a note of that and be like, okay, because this happened, later on something happens. The other thing I'm a very big proponent, because I basically play with like very few safety nets for characters in my game. Not in a safety X card way, but in terms of their lifespan.
Got it.
I try very hard to make sure that if a character dies, especially, there's a direct line they can draw between what they chose as a player and what happened to their character. That line has to be there. The same thing with the villains. Typically, you want the plots and schemes to be tied in with what's going on, and they go, oh man, we should have known that so-and-so would have turned us into such and such, and then this happened, and now it's so much worse, and what are we gonna do? but those plots and those schemes are important. Then probably the most critical thing, and that's going to be from this book.
Just pull them all out today.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
So this is Heroes and Villains. This is basically a bunch of pre-gens or 7C, but what it does is it introduces a new mechanic that is really cool, and it's something I never even thought of until I read this book in a practical sense. They have something called redemption.
Okay.
Every villain has a redemption arc. Some villains are irredeemable. You have to decide as a GM very early on, is this villain redeemable or not? And if they're not redeemable, how are they going to be dealt with? Will they only accept death, talking about the APs, these horrible villains, will they only accept death as the way to stop their plan? Or are they redeemable? Well, going back to our Star Wars example, Star Wars is so universal. It's such a great, I'm so glad those movies exist because it gives us a common language to discuss. It's a mythology we all understand. Vader had a redemption arc.
Right.
The Emperor did not.
Right.
Irredeemable, redeemable. So what do we have? Then we have the villain comes back. We see Vader kill Obi-Wan. We see Vader try to take out Luke. You're like, uh-oh. Then Vader shows up on Hoth with the big tank guns, and they're shooting everything. And as soon as Han sees Vader, he's like, that's it, we're out. He's too powerful. Setting your villain up where they have kind of like a first form, a second form, and a final form. It's video gamey, but it just works.
It just works.
Those stories work for a reason.
Yeah.
And although players might feel like, yeah, we trounced the guy on the first time we met him, believe me, they will be so much more like really feeling like they got one over on you if you don't hold your hand, let them play the character the way they're going to be played, go all out, handily beat them the first time, but don't kill the characters per se. But just let them know they've been beat.
Right.
And then they will pick themselves, dust themselves off, and then they'll go harder, beat them again. And then on that third time at the most, second or third time, depending on the villain, let the PCs have enough strength where they can overcome it. Once again, not fudging it, but where you start the PC, I said overtuned. Watch
the NPC,
the villain rather. Watch that level after that.
Right.
Let the PCs catch up and maybe exceed it.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple. I think there's a couple key takeaways here, which is that because a lot of people have a problem with this in D&D, and rightfully so. Which is players they won't accept somebody getting away. Right. They view that as a loss. They view that as you took away my prize. And so they could be very, very, both in game and out of game, they can be very, very upset if an NPC gets away. But the other problem is the opposite is also true, which is if the NPC beats the party, usually in D&D, that's a problem. That's usually TPK, right? Like, I'm not trying to throw D&D under the bus, but if you look at something like Fabula Ultima, right? I could have an NPC, which is, too strong for the party members, but they have to fight him anyways because they need to, but it's early in the story. And I kill everybody, easily, but nobody chooses sacrifice. They all choose surrender, and boom, the story moves on. It's harder to have that tool in a game where it's like, well, no, your character's just dead. Right. And so that could be very, very troubling. Now, to your point about Obi-Wan, right? Obi-Wan wasn't a PC. Obi-Wan was an NPC. So there's this advantage of having the villain kill one of the NPCs. The other thing is, too, at least early on, it's very unlikely that the villain's goal is to actually kill the party members. They don't even have enough care to do that. They want to, the party is just an obstacle. So, the villain might take everybody out and, then just proceed on their way.
Yeah,
because
in prison.
Yeah, just
he had Princess Leia.
Right, just leave him to die.
And instead of making an example of her, what does Vader do? Chucks her into jail. He's like, she has information we want. Let's get the truth serum in her and see what she knows first.
To be fair, he does then order her execution conveniently as they're going to rescue her.
Yes, that has to happen though.
But I think that if you want to get away with this in D&D, you either need to set up a situation where the monster or the boss or whatever like that has a reason for why he wouldn't just go in and just coup de grace the party. Or if the party is going to get the better of the villain and he's like, I'll get you next time, Gadget, you need to set up a situation where this NPC probably, if they fought to the last hit point, could kill the party. But the NPC has way more to lose than the party members. They're big and important. And so they are statted in a way such that, most of these games, like if you're thinking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, this might be like a PL +2 or PL +3 villain, easily capable of killing the party members. But that's not what he wants to do. He doesn't really care about that. And the party could attack him and start beating him down, and maybe they would beat him, but it's not going to be easy. And so at like half hit points, he goes, I got to get out of here, right? Like, I'll get you next time, Gadget, because I'm not going to die here. This isn't something I'm willing to die for. The party members PCs are always constantly willing to throw their characters' lives away. The NPC, your GM villain, he's like, I've got big plans. I can't just die here on some random thing. So it could be very anticlimactic, though. Some people view it that way. If you think about Rise of the Rune Lords, that very first adventure path, and, maybe they could do a better job of saying, oh, it's the Nualia, she's the A-smart villain. And you get to the end, and you're fighting her, and, she realizes she's beat because she's at like half hit points. She's bloodied. She's down to her last 20 or 30 hit points. And she says, this isn't the end. And then she steps through the unknown demon portal. The party isn't going to follow her through the unknown demon portal, but she's gotten away. And the party has won. She didn't destroy the town. But a lot of people will go, come on, we were supposed to get her gold and magical items so that we could level up appropriately, and now we're fucked because, she got away and you stole that from us, It's like, people can have a bad reaction to it, even though we're used to seeing it. We grew up with it, right? You watched cartoons as a kid, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or G.I. Joe. Every week, Shredder or Cobra Commando or Mumra, they got away. Like, it happened every week, But as gamers, we've been taught by video games, everything dies, nothing lives, no mercy, no surrender, everything goes out in a body bag. And don't accept anything less. So some of it comes down to that education.
Yeah. And I do find in the longer running campaigns that I run, and a lot of times in the one shots as well, but mostly in the longer running campaigns, I'm a huge fan of very sticky endings. I don't like clean wrap up. Everyone is, yay, we did the thing, and the other thing, like sometimes it ends in just like really unsatisfactory. Depending on the kind of game that you're running, especially if you're running horror, you're doing it right. If you're running a horror game and it ends with people feeling satisfied at the end, you did it wrong. If you're running a heroic game, though, something that's, more high heroics, high fantasy, high magic kind of a thing, you have to tune the expectations accordingly. But yeah, you want to make sure that your villain has a definite goal. They have plots, they have their own schemes, their own networks and informations, and they continue to go ahead. And if you want to add some complexity, the redemption arc is great. Instead of the villain's just villain because they're villain, hand-wringing, mustache-twirling villain, try and imbue them with the same thing that you had in your nemesis. Right? The same thing, that frenemy kind of vibe.
The best villains, one of my favorite episodes of one of our Mutants and Masterminds campaign, we had a couple characters, and Aaron played a guy named Joe Armstrong, the American Ninja. He was this like jingoistic American gun-ho, like 80s Marine / ninja. It was very much like a tongue-in-cheek from those, Ninja 80 movies, action movies with, he had a katana in one hand and a machine gun in the other hand. Well, they went to like the opposite world, or like the mirror universe, and he met his character in the mirror universe, arguably his greatest villain. But, the thing is like they both had this deep and abiding love for America. But in the mirror universe, right, America was this crumbling third world nation, beset on all sides by its enemies. And a good villain should make the player go, like, that could have been me, right? Or like, I could have ended up that same path. Going back to Star Wars, the moment of redemption occurs when Luke is using his anger and defeats his father, cuts off his hand, and sees that his father's hand is the sparking, metallical thread. And he looks at his own hand and he realizes, oh shit, that's me. That's why I saw myself in the cave, right? Because I'm going down the same path, that this is where this is leading me. And that's when he has his big, throws away his lightsaber, and it's the best. It's the best moment in Star Wars history. But like my point is I think the villains that really stick with you are the ones that feel like I almost understand them when they're
that's the thing.
When they're the mustache, like for example, I don't know anything about Call of Cthulhu, but when you find out that there's somebody who's willing to, I don't know, risk the souls and lives of every single person in New York City, but it's because they want to bring back their dead loved one. Sure, it's not good. I'm not saying it is. But you understand it, it feels maybe a little bit more like, wow, okay, yeah, if I had this, what would I do, to bring back one of my kids? Right? Like, would I go that far? No, maybe I wouldn't, but maybe there's a world where I would, and so then you start putting yourself in their shoes. Those villains, I think, are much more interesting than the villains that are just like, I want to destroy everything because evil.
It's fun to have them, though. You just want to make sure, like, what's the point? What are you doing? What's the goal of the campaign itself? And the villain should be just as important in some ways as the PCs in terms of the campaign arc and where you're going with it, and making sure that at one point either they have to become aware of the villain or the villain has to become aware of them, and then make sure that you tune it in a way where it can replicate that hero's journey a little bit. It will be more interesting in the long run. And then if you really want to go advanced, give them a redemption arc. And then here's the hard part. This is where everyone's got to be a grown-up as a GM. If the PCs decide they don't want to pursue that redemption arc, they want to murder this guy, you got to be okay with that at the end of the day. You can't decide, well, I decided they have a redemption arc. That means the story is now about the villain's redemption. Right. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
Work that way.
Hang on loosely, right? Is the
yes, exactly.
I think you saw this, but K. Steinwein says, "Well, how do you?"
There was a question I marked.
Yeah. How do you approach a situation when the players just don't care about the villains, no matter what you try to do? Well, I know that question's for Ben, but my response is, okay. Then if that villain has a 3-step plan, then they get to make progress on it, and maybe as the campaign proceeds and the players are off doing whatever they do care about, you hear these things of, oh yeah, did you hear about the orphanage that all the children went missing? Oh, did you hear about the ancient ritual that destroyed the lower half of Manhattan? Oh, did you see the gigantic portal in the sky as the elder gods are coming through to destroy? Yeah, okay. Like, you don't have to care.
It's an interesting question because I am curious about what you mean by don't care. So if you're a GM, I'm just going to be plain here for a second, that's worth their salt, and you can read the room and you're getting they don't care. Why are you still doing this? You need to stop the game, or at the top of a session, ask them, I feel like you guys are not feeling this. How can we change this? How can we retune it? I do it all the time.
Yeah.
How can we make this so it's something you enjoy and I enjoy? Here's what I was thinking, is where I was going with it. But remember, it's a game. It's a conversation.
Right.
If people are investing their time, if they're not feeling it and they're there and they're just phoning it in, you need to ask them, what can I do to change that so you're not phoning it in, because now you're phoning it in and I feel like we're going through the motions, and then there's a lot of unspoken resentment that builds up.
You're so right, and I'll tell you why you're so right, because it speaks to the growing passivity that people view the RPG hobby. Okay, when an author writes a novel, okay, or when a show writers create a season of episodes, it's not like after every chapter, right? Robert Jordan, well, he's dead now, but it's not like after every chapter of Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan can check in with the reader and say, hey, are you still enjoying this? Are you still liking where this is going? Okay. No. Oh, you would like to see more of this character, less of that character. Great. Okay. I'll chapter 2 will be different, and we'll set course. Same thing with a TV show. Hey, did you guys really enjoy that episode? Oh, you didn't? Okay, well, we'll try something different for the next episode. They don't have that ability, right? They do what their vision is, and they enact it, and then you see it. And we're just used to this world now where we just go, well, I guess I just got to accept what it is. I didn't really like this season of the show, but I still spent 25 hours watching every single episode of it. It's like, Why? Well, I had to. That's what they gave me. RPGs are not that. Now
Absolutely not.
Now some people think they are, and I think again the hobby and the atmosphere and the critical role and the adventure paths have led people to believe, oh well, the story is already written out, and I mean, what could I change? Look, it's either this or not play. So like, what choice do I have? And that's just strictly not true. So.
Yeah, totally agree. And man, you said something. It reminded me of something I wanted to bring up, and now it just completely slipped my mind. Let me think for a sec. You mentioned about asking for permission from the players. Are they okay? Yes, this is what I was going to say. So, for example, in my Call of Cthulhu game, which is currently the longest running campaign I have right now, which is we're almost 5 years into playing one campaign.
That's a long time.
Every Monday, like clockwork. We've only missed maybe 4 sessions in as many years. I like introducing side material into the campaign. So, for example, let's say the characters are going to England. I'm going to go, wow, guys, I might read like a Great Regency or Gaslight era thing. And I go, I can tweak this so it kind of tells the backstory of this one character. I would never spring that on the players. I always will say, I know you're on the boat, but when you land, I was thinking about doing a historical thing that we can insert into the campaign here. Are you okay with that? Mm-hmm. It's so important that you onboard the players, because if you don't, they're just not going to feel it, and it's going to be a real drag. And you want to change it up too. You want to keep things interesting. Have your NPCs be varied. Have them have a past.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with doing a time jump in any game you're playing. It doesn't matter if it's D&D, Doctor Who, whatever. Go, you know what? Would you like to know about... and I think of Phineas and Ferb, where like some of my favorite episodes are ones when they showed Doofenshmirtz's background, like his tragic backstory. Those are great because he's the guy, he's set up as a villain, but Disney knows you can't just have the villain. You have to somehow make him likable. Right. People have to relate to him. So what do? They show the Doofenshmirtz background episodes, and they're usually very lighthearted, and most of them are like musicals.
Yeah.
It's brilliant though. And that is good storytelling. Like that's
absolutely.
People should be paying attention to that.
I mean, it speaks to Fabula Ultima, right? It speaks to the GM scenes, right? Because again, we know what we're doing. This is a meta construct. This is a game. This is a game about creating stories. So, I know that there are folks out there who want to play their RPG like it's some sort of virtual simulation of real life. And the idea that like, well, I shouldn't be able to see the villain in his lair, hatching his plans. Like my character wouldn't know that. And I would challenge back to you, your character still doesn't know that. But I respect you as a player, and now you get to know it, which means you get to enjoy it. Now, how and where and how you act, or how and why you act on that information, that's on you. My hope is that you wouldn't be too overt with it, but I also want it to guide your decisions so that you feel like you're making smart choices because the player knows, I know what the monster, what the monster's up to. My PC doesn't, but how convenient that my player character happens to be going to that same location, right? That's exactly what I want. I want my players to be in on the scheme.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. You want the players to be in on it. And I do, because I use the GME a lot, the Game Master Emulator. And sometimes at the top of a scene, you might roll what's called a remote event. And it's funny, for anyone who is watching that was at PAX with me when I ran 7th Sea, or every night we had a private game. And I ran 7th Sea. And we opened the first session, I rolled to see what happened, and it was a remote event. And I'm like, okay, we are opening with total meta knowledge to what's going on here.
Right.
This is the plot getting thrown at the players here, and then you just got to trust them to be able to run with it. But it was great because it allowed me to set up what's going on. Who's the main villain? What is their goal? What are they trying to do? And then I go, okay, now we're going to back out of that and go to our opening scene. And then when we get to the end, everyone's like, yeah, of course, it just makes perfect sense.
This makes perfect sense.
because I saw the plotting and the scheming going on behind.
Well,
the scenes.
the other thing too is, I'd rather bring my players in as allies to the storytelling than to us being competition. That I'm trying to steer the story this way, and they're trying to steer the story this way, and we're not in harmony. We're not work. I'd rather us work together, and there's a give and a take to that. That's part of that conversation, right? Which is my job is to introduce threats and challenges and conflicts into your world, right? To make your lives messy, to make your lives dangerous, to make your lives full of adventure and excitement and danger and mystery, or whatever the themes or genres of your game are. So go with me on that. But it's also my job to take your actions and spin off new threats and react to what you're doing. So it's like a dance, it's a harmony, it's a push-pull. And I think that, because we're used to dealing with people, NPCs are a fantastic way to do that. But again, I think that it comes down to is like, when you're talking about these villains and their redemption arcs, and you can't have a redemption arc if you meet and kill the villain in the same hour of the game, right? And you've never even had a conversation. It just doesn't work that way. And I know some people might say that's really hard to do in a game like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I don't necessarily disagree with you, because I think the ways that you end up doing it in a Pathfinder 2 game can feel a little heavy-handed and kludgy. And oftentimes it could feel like the party is being robbed somehow of a victory, even though they're not. Whereas in a game like Fabula Ultima, when the villain spends 2 Ultima points in order to, get away, the party's like, all right, like, hey, we just made them burn a bunch of Ultima points. That's great.
Yeah. 7th Sea does this really well in that you have to spend the villain's influence to escape a scene. And guess what? Guess what currency that the villain uses to enact their schemes? Their influence. So the players know that when the villain uses that influence to escape from a scene, they are now weakened.
They're not going to be able to. Their agenda is being. The players have disrupted them by being a disruptive element. Yeah.
And now there's blood in the water, and any player worth their salt is going to be like, well, we got to press now that we have the opportunity to now that he's weakened. We know that we can maybe ruin his reputation. And one of the community games that we ran, Pierre, if you're still here, Pierre's Duelist had a great story arc, and he did exactly that, where he went around town talking to the fellow musketeers, foaming dissent among them, and putting posters up around town and stuff like that, and like hammering once the influence of the villain started to weaken. As a group, they were like, okay, now it's going to be Operation Take This Guy Down from the inside, because then when they feast the villain again, now they only have their strength, which means they are basically half as strong as they were, because you combine the two stats together.
They're kind of mortal now, right? Like you've brought them down. Yeah, but see that's just good. That's just good game design, Ben. Like that's just where you go, hey, the thing that I want you to do is also the thing that you want to do, because it's beneficial to you in the mechanics of the game, but it also happens to tell a really great story, and we get this great pushing back, so that's That's fantastic. Boothby says, I used to write out cutscenes of what my bad guys were doing and send it out between the sessions. My players loved it. I love that idea.
It's not a bad idea.
Because it gives you, the GM, maybe a little bit more time. Especially, I love the idea. I think as a player, this is a great way, because again, remember, we're talking to the players and the NPCs. The PCs go and they do something. And maybe it isn't immediately clear in the moment, in the session, of how the player's actions have affected the wider world. But what you could do as a GM is think about their actions, maybe, think about the natural causes, maybe you roll on some random tables. You come up with, this is what happened because the PCs hit. Now look, there's no way that your PCs would know this, but I want to give you, the players, that victory, And so I'm going to tell you about how, I'm going to show the scene of where the High Lord comes into the burnt out remains of the fortress that you guys just destroyed, and he's kicking through the rubble, and he says, what a waste, and
as he comes across the dagger you discarded because you threw it to Orc, and think about it, and he pulls it up and goes, I know the make of this dagger.
Right.
I know who made this, or whatever the case may be. Just planting that between sessions.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Approve.
And then before you know it, then like the party members rush to the friendly local weaponsmith in town, and he's been kidnapped or he's been killed, right? Because the villain is now after them. So again, I think that's like just a fun way to incorporate. And again, it just comes down to, involving and incorporating, because again, NPCs, if you make them one-dimensional, then your party members are going to treat them like what they are, which is basically a bunch of blocked text, right? They're just a quest giver. They're a quest hub. They are an exposition dump. In order for an NPC to have more dimension to it, you need to know what role are they serving, not just in your narrative, but in the game itself, right? Are they there to be an ally and to provide resources? Maybe there's somebody, and it's okay to discreetly compartmentalize them. This is the guy we go to when we need to get in someplace that we're not supposed to get into. This is the lady that we talk to when we want to get an invite to the ritziest parties in the town. We know, I know a guy, I know a girl. That's how you kind of build up these relationships. And as the party members go in one or multiple directions, they will find themselves interacting with these NPCs over and over again. And ideally, each time they learn something new, they get a better shade of understanding. Legend of the Five Rings kind of mechanizes this because characters, NPCs, have a list of advantages and disadvantages, which means something mechanically in the game. It's almost like knowing the true name of a person. If you know a person's giri, their ninjo, their passions, their anxieties, and their disadvantages and their advantages, like you have them marked, whether it's a duel or a courtly intrigue or a battle. You have the better of them. And the way that you acquire that knowledge is by interacting with them. And some of it's just role playing and conversation. Some of it's skill checks and action checks. But the fact of the matter is you have to have that multiple repeat process. And I think that's true for villains as much as it's true for, Ben's ban, right? His bystanders, allies, and nemesis. Because I think that's a great system. And again, Blades in the Dark basically builds that into your character sheet when you're making your character, because it understands that those are just great levers for you as a player and for you as a GM to sort of, adjust, steer, course correct the story and take it in different places. So, all right. Well, Ben, we're going to wrap up here. You have any final thoughts on NPCs before we?
Okay. It's funny. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm sure there's still more things we didn't uncover.
Sure.
We're talking in very broad strokes. We could take any one of these things and really get mechanical.
And we probably will over the next couple days on the Knights of Last Call Patreon Discord. And again, I just want to real quickly add here, what Ben and I are doing on this Zoom call is what Ben and I and countless others literally do pretty much every day anyways. And we do it on the Knights of Last Call Patreon Discord. So, if you enjoy conversations like this and you want to be part of conversations like this, not just like, what's the sickest build for my character, bro? If you want something a little bit more, we have that too. But if you want something a little bit more, philosophical and a little bit more compelling, I really recommend that community highly. Not just because it's, my community, but just because I think it's great regardless. We did have a question specifically for you, Ben. It's from Rule of Cool. Says a little off topic, but I want to hear Ben's answer. How do you deal with passive players? How do you make them follow hooks and not wait for a spear?
Yeah, so it depends on what causes their passivity. Are they distracted or bored?
Right.
Or are they shy? What is the reason they are not jumping into the fray? You have to know your players. Once you kind of know the kind of player they are, then the next question, and this is a key question, we're kind of, once again, now we're going more into like GM philosophy here. As a GM, when you're playing Game X, you should know what every one of your players considers fun. And then you have to be willing to cater to each one of them. For example, I know when we were playing our MERP game, one of my players just wanted to kill goblins. That's literally all he wanted to do, was he wanted big battles. So when I brought in Middle-earth strategy battles, just for that player, we brought in an entire other game. I spent like $150 on these rules from Games Workshop just so he could do the thing he wanted to do, which is go against like hordes and hordes of goblins. That was what he was waiting for. Other players, if you're playing a scholar and someone else is playing something else, they want something else from the game. You got to dig in, like find out what it is
Right.
that they like and draw them into the group. However, what you don't want to do is just turn the spotlight on them like a deer with a headlight. That you don't want to do, because you need to know why they're disengaged. If
Yeah.
they're disengaged because they're bored or whatever, personally, what I would do if someone is bored at the table and they're playing on their phone or they're doing Pokemon Go or whatever, texting, whatever the case may be, I will wait until the session is over. And then I will say, am I boring you? What is the problem? Are you not having fun? However, sometimes in game, if it's particularly bad, I will have to be like, hello, are you here or not here? You know, do we have to stop? Do we need a break? Whatever the case may be. And this is where having that open door policy is really, really good. Where now it's considered very in vogue to have that open door policy. If someone wants to leave the table, they can at any time for any reason. And I think most people understand what that means.
Right.
And if someone is distracted, like you're getting a text and it's like something else is happening, you'd be like, BRB. That's all you got to say.
Right.
Walk away from the table.
Right.
Come back 5 minutes later when you're not so distracted. So it's a hard question to answer because it once again comes down to what is your relationship with that person.
My take on it too would be, understand what the expectations are of your group. The person who might be at fault here is you. If you have a group of people who you've gotten together and what they basically want is like, look, I just want you to read me exposition text that'll take me to the next combat. Then when we roll initiative, I get to move around on the grid and get to use my cool combat powers and abilities. And then we go to the next fight and we go to the next fight. And then there's some plot exposition that you'll tell us. And then the breadcrumbs take us to the next fight and the next fight. And then there's a big fight. We get some cool magical items. I level up and we do that maybe 7 or 8 times. And then that's the campaign. If that's what all your players want, and you're over here going, I'm creating this open world sandbox, and there's a bunch of NPCs in my play. Maybe you've put together the wrong group for that. That's not what they want. What they want isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, I don't want to say I got in trouble. I didn't. But like people were like, oh, Derek, you were really shitting on Ryotama. Yeah, because I thought that style of play is terrible. I'm not trying to say that nobody should play like that. If that is a thing that you, and apparently in the Japanese culture, it's very popular to basically be like, hey, let's let this person tell us a story and entertain us. And it's almost like a form of interactive storytelling movie. Okay, great. Perfect. Great game for that. That's what you should be playing. Right. And so if you're trying to create all these plot hooks and your players are just completely not interested in that, then one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, am I playing the right game? Am I playing the right system?
Yeah.
Maybe the problem here is me.
That's the thing. If there's a disconnect that's that strong, you need to go, when did this happen? Where did it happen? Is this a pattern of behavior?
Right.
A lot of players sometimes feel chained to the group. This isn't a marriage.
That's true.
And some people feel the same thing. GMs feel chained to these players. And it's like, no, run the game you want to play. Find the group that was willing to play it. Do not bring someone into a game under the auspices of you're going to try and make them. You can't change people.
You're right. You're going to love it.
Change themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if somebody comes in with that kind of attitude, it's just no amount of cajoling and things like that.
Yeah.
And that is the truth. And the fact of the matter is there are some people, which is why there are plenty of groups out there that sort of boil down to that lowest common denominator game, which is often D&D. And I understand that is the reality for a lot of folks, that is just the way it is. All I would suggest to you is, while I do not think that internet-based play is my favorite way, I will say this. There are tons of communities out there, not just Knights of the Last Call. There are tons of communities out there, specific communities, sometimes for that one game, where there's a bunch of passionate people who are interested in that game. And I know that it's fun to play with your friends, and I get it. Like, that's my style of play too. But if they do not want to play 7th Sea, and you want to play 7th Sea, okay, don't try to force them to, I don't want to, if I was in Ben's group and he's like, oh, I love Doctor, he's like, I hate Doctor Who. He's like, I want to play Doctor Who. I'm like, look, dude, I'm not going to ruin the game for you by coming in and being horrible.
Oh yeah. It's been a year?
Yeah.
I literally rave about this game at least once or twice a week. And I cannot put a group together to run this for the love of money And it just is what it is.
It is
One
what-
day it'll happen.
Right. And so you just got to kind of be, acceptable. You just sort of have to accept that. So, but thank you everybody for the comments and the suggestions and the great questions. And I'm sorry, whenever I have a guest on or whatever, I know I don't, I'm not able to interact with as much chat because I'm usually paying attention to what my guest is saying. So I want to thank Ben for coming on today. I thought there's some really great snippets. I saw some people saying we need to cut this up into some shorts because there were some really nice little snippets there. I really liked the stuff about the investigative versus narrative, understanding the narrative beats and what the role of the NPC is mechanically. I thought the bystander ally nemesis stuff is fantastic. And I just see echoes of that in so many other game design that I always thought was really, really good. And again, talking about why NPCs work, why they don't work, what to avoid, what to embrace. This whole very lengthy conversation about, we were calling them like, are they quasi PCs, quasi NPCs, like, semi PCs? This idea of embracing this maybe this more evolved, newer style of play that has sort of emerged with these kind of more narrative, more storytelling focused systems. But even taking them into games that traditionally aren't that way is let your players have some free reign. Let them play the NPC in a scene. I'll play this NPC, you play that NPC, you play that NPC. Your two PCs aren't in this scene, so this gives you something to do. And I have the trust, and and legitimately, I also have the interest of seeing what you'll make out of it, and make the game your own. I think that is a untapped area of resource that I would love to see. And then lastly, villains, and Ben has a much more formulaic plan for how to make a villain successful. For me, it's more of just like, how do you make them not just one-dimensional, and how do you make them not, they appear, they fight to the death, they leave a note that tells you everything about them. To me, that's just not a villain. If the players don't have some kind of understanding or relationship, it's not going to work out. Shadram coming in with 40 New Zealand bucks. With a massive super chat, says more guests, which was today's super chat goal. More Ben. Not sure if this will even make the goal because of stupid exchange rates, but I think it'll get us pretty close, Shadram. Everybody's been really, really positive about having Ben on today, and I thought that it is well warranted because Ben's really great about that. So Ben, New Year coming up. What are your, now I know technically this year was your year of no D20. So you've gone up. Now you're playing AD&D, but we've discussed this before. AD&D is not D20.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you learned through this year, and what are you going to take with you into the next year?
Yeah, so I went from 7 campaigns to 3. That was a huge one for me for this year. Really going less wide and more deep with the campaigns. Doing AD&D 1 day to 1 day, like traditional big group campaign, was a huge thing that I wanted to for a long time, and that's going fantastic. Everyone has been just amazing on that one, so that's sticking around for a while. I had some campaigns end, and this year coming up for me will be a lot of new stuff, but longer term again. Once again, trying to go wider. Deeper rather, not so wide. So first up is going to be WEG Star Wars, which I've never played, West End Game Star Wars before. And I read that book, and I immediately felt regret that I'd never read it before. It is amazing. That system is so good. Like, this is why people say it's such a great game. I honestly never gave it the time of day, and now I kind of feel regret over that, but we're going to make up for that next week. Then Lex Arcana is coming up. Hard Master is possibly coming up. And what else is happening? Fabio Ultima is another game that's coming up. Call of Cthulhu is, it's in my blood. It's perennial. That'll be every Monday night until we all give up. And I have still this pile here. This is a small portion of the games I picked up at PAX Unplugged. We only got through 9 of them, guys, so we have another 11 to go. So that's going to be a big thing. I'm at the end of the pile now, however, where it's like we're entering that, like, you need a very specific group for it. I do want to call out a couple of highlights to everyone while I have everyone.
Yeah, you've got 100 people watching you, I think.
Yeah, so a couple of highlights, things that really, if you're into sci-fi horror or Mothership, buy Sister. purchase this. This is one of the best supplements for the game, period. And then on the deeper end of the pool, a lot of people are familiar with 10 Candles, but they're not familiar with To Serve Her Wintry Hunger. I had a long conversation with Stephen Dewey, who signed my copy of the book. He thinks this is better than 10 Candles. This game, you need the right group for it, but I can't wait to play it. It doesn't have much in terms of rules, but man, it is dark. And the other one, I can find it real quick.
While Ben looks for that, just want to say thank you. We just got a sudden pouring in of super chats and tips.
Thank you all.
Shadram came in, and then Marvelous Mr. Mean came in with a $10 super chat, agreeing that we need even more guests. Save Versus with more guests, no notes. And Henry with a $20 tip says, Ben, thank you for sharing your wisdom. And in a Jack Nicklaus voice, you make me want to be a better GM. And then Sidon came in with a $10 tip, said, fuck it, let's just fill it up. So, this is the wrap up for us for our big holiday week and the end of this year. And so I want to say thank you to everybody. I'm going to let Ben finish, but I do want to just acknowledge that we just had a really amazing quick spurt of support there. And that was awesome, everybody.
Yeah,
thank you so much for that.
So these are games, if you're in the Discord, these are the games I'm going to be looking to play, but they require very specific groups for it. And the other one, we were talking about geopolitics, Reliance, which is basically how to host a revolution, the RPG. But as you can see, there's not much in terms of the rules.
Right.
But, I mean, this game, these two, I cannot wait to play with the right group of people. So basically, if you're mature and you're into kind of mature concepts, that's really what I'm looking forward to. And I have a few others that are a little bit easier to play, but yeah,
my year is going to be kind of interesting because we've had a couple of stream goals that were reached this week. There's some big ticket games. I think we've talked about this, Ben, on the server, that I feel like we're approaching another sea change in the way that people are thinking. I saw a post, maybe it was a tweet today from Matt Colville, who said, he was tweeting about like, hey, we've had a great response. Tons of people are downloading our new MCDM RPG packet. He goes, but what's interesting is he's like, he learned from his lead game designer. I guess there's maybe like a little bit of a feedback for him that for a lot of people, this is the first time that they've ever really looked at another set of rules that wasn't D&D. Right now, sure, it's MCDM RPG. It's still kind of, fighting combat monsters. But the fact that people are starting because of the disintegration and trust and maybe because honestly, it's just because it's the new edition. Anytime a new edition of D&D comes out, it shakes up things. And we haven't had a new edition of D&D since like 2013, really. So it's been 10 years. So you have an entire huge generation of gamers who've never had a reason to consider playing anything else. And so we're just entering this massive area of sea change. And I know that there's a lot of folks out there who want to see what we are thinking of games. People have asked us to take a look at Candela Obscura, the MCDM RPG. We've also had people ask about the DC-20, Legacy of the Valiant, and just a host full of other ones. And, as a game person who's interested in these games, I'm sure that I'll be taking a look at some of these, but I'm one of those people who doesn't like to review a game. I mean, I can look at it, but to review it, I feel like I really do need to play it. So for me, one of the strong things is going to be, how do I get these games to the table? That being said, I've said this the last couple of days, there are some games like Fabula Ultima and the Avatar Magpie PBTA game that are just so compelling to me right now. I love games that enable players, both people that I know that are very creative and people I know who maybe aren't as creative, to see them, to see them. It's like when you meet somebody who says, I'm bad at music and I'm bad at art, and then you show them the fundamentals and it's garbage, but like they're able to play a chord and maybe a little melody, or they draw something and it actually kind of looks like something. And they're amazed that they had this inside of themselves. Right? That they have this ability to create. As a GM, that for me nowadays is like the single most empowering moment or feeling. I had an opportunity to play Avatar Legends game with a bunch of patrons at Origins. And I think half the players, maybe more than half, had never even played a Powered by the Apocalypse game before. They'd pretty much only played D&D or something similar. And we're playing the game, and somebody said something completely, off the hook, like it didn't even make sense. And it was like, because his character had rolled low, so it was a complication. Like he rolled a 7, 8, or 9. He was trying to get away from a patrol. A Fire Nation patrol was trying to thing, and he ducks down an alley, and he rolls 7, 8, or 9. And I go, a hand shoots out from a nearby doorway and yoinks you in and closes the door as the Fire Nation patrol comes in. And everyone's like, oh, who is it? And I don't even know what I was thinking. To be honest, I completely forgot about it. Someone else at the table was like, oh, it's his dad. And I was like, yes, it is his dad. And everyone was like, that just happened? What? Like the player who created that idea, and then that took the whole session in an entirely different direction for that character and for that growth. And then there was this whole arc of like his father saying like, you need to get out of here. And it's like, Dad, you don't trust me. You weren't there for me. I had to do this on my own. And it was like this great like father-son dynamic. And then at the end, the arc of the episode was like, there was a moment the son had to do something really dangerous, and the father knew that only he's like, no, you go, you're better at this, and I have to trust you, and whatever. And it was like this, like, yes, I'll send my son to potentially die because I trust him and I believe he's his own man. Anyways, it was this amazing art because somebody else interjected the table. And I remember the look on that player's face. They felt like they had just, created, they birthed Genesis, like they had just created a whole new world. And that was really, really awesome for me. So those are definitely, and Fabula Ultima, same thing, and I love watching people experience that.
Yeah, there's a good point you have in there for GMing. There was a good GM tip that you had hidden in your story, which is you can start small. You don't need to get your players playing PBTA per se.
Right.
If they are a diehard D20 group, let them play the D20, but you might want to start introducing questions. They critted.
Yes.
Just say, what does that look like?
Yes.
What does that look like? And then when they explain it, you just go, yes, exactly. They maybe embellish a little bit and go to the next person. They roll, they miss. You go, you didn't miss. It's deflected. To explain how that looks.
Right.
And then once you start getting that dialogue going, you're slowly, you'll get them there.
Yeah. For me, I've used this example before. And quick shout out, Rick S. also hopping in on this donation train with a $10 tip. Thank you, Rick. He said nothing simple, but thanks, Ben. Thanks, Derek. So thank you, Rick, for just being an incredible supporter of ours all year round. It was fantastic to have you here. Oh God, what was I saying? When somebody makes a skill check and they succeed, instead of you telling them what happened, say, you're the one with the great roll. You tell me what are these berries? What do they do? What did you find in the cave? I don't know. I found, some moss that, okay, yeah, cool. What does the moss do? Like, just introduce it through skill checks and just let your players, when they roll a really high roll, or maybe they roll a really bad roll, tell them, be like, ooh, you didn't find what you were looking for in the cave. What did you find? And the player goes, maybe I found a sleeping bear. And you're like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's go with that. And very slowly, you can start to sort of bring these characters into it. Now, that's not for every style of game. I'm not saying that every game needs that. There are games where I'm playing where I'm basically like, it's me versus you, and there's no hand, there's no hand waving here, and we can make magical quantum bears appear. But I do think that creativity and player agency is, at the end of the day, I think for me, what really makes RPG special. So I'm looking forward to this kind of host of all this new stuff that I'm sure people will want us to take a look at. But I also really want to get back to my, to pardon the pun, but really get back to my roots, of PBTA type games, and really explore some of those, because it's been really fun and rewarding. So yeah, I think it'll be another exciting year. I don't know how much classic D20 I'm going to play. I've been playing Pathfinder 2nd edition for 4 years straight now, multiple campaigns, sometimes multiple campaigns at once. It's, I'm not saying I'm sick of it, but it's time for a break, and I need to get some other games into my system. And it kind of works out well, because the game system right now is kind of in limbo. One book has come out, but there's still no core 2, and there's still no bestiary. So just a great opportunity for me to get some new games in too, Ben. All right. right. Let's see if there's anything else I missed here. Tyler would love to see us play Legend of the Five Rings. I have discussed this before. The thing is I am very aware, I'm very cognizant of the fact that Legend of the Five Rings touches on some very real beliefs and real places and concepts of, like, Amaterasu is a real deity in Japanese Shinto belief. So the fact that, you know, an Onotangu is really a deity, and so to have those characters be like, it's fine for my personal table, but I would never want to make anyone who is watching it uncomfortable because it didn't feel like because I'll be the first to admit, I'm not a Japanese theology major. So I'm sure I'm not paying it the correct amount of respect. So, you know, I've always had that kind of concern about a game like Legend of the Five Rings, even though I love the game to death. Let's see. Carzoni going to try out the MCDM system. I got it downloaded already, Carzoni, and we had a tip goal this week for people to have me check it out. So I'm going to be checking it out probably this weekend because, Ben, I'm finally done.
Yeah, even I have looked at the MCDM. Even I could not avoid the gravitational pull of that. I just made fun of the grammar mostly, but I mean, I still read it.
Yeah.
80 pages of it.
You're ahead of me. I have not I downloaded it. I have not read it yet. So, you know, it'll be really awesome to kind of just explore it with the group. Because again, for me, I like it when people are excited about a game, even if it's not a game that I'm excited about. You know, like my Ryu Tamada stream, you know, people were like, "Oh, Derek," like, no, listen, I'm having a reaction to this game. It's negative, but I'm not insulting or if you really love this game, I want to know why. You know, Emmanuel, who wrote Fabula Ultima, had a great series of responses to my video, and I responded back to him, and I basically was just like, "That's a great point. Love it. I'd love to get that perspective, but I still have questions. Like, what does this game do well then, and what is it trying to serve, and what purpose is it? That might not be a purpose that I'm interested in, but that doesn't mean I can't learn from it. And like you said, Ben, there are plenty of games that I know I'll never play, but there's ideas and concepts and philosophies about how to approach the game that have shaped the very way that I play all games."
Yep.
So,
although I doubt I'll play MCDM. I am interested, you know, it's part of the conversation right now, right? This is what everyone is talking about. So
right.
It's one thing to know it, and I will never claim to be an expert because I don't know if I'll ever see it at the table. But at least I can look it over, read it, see what I like and don't like about it, maybe yoink some ideas from it, or at the very least go. I mean, stranger things have happened. I'm looking at a 5e game now, so I know you never know what's gonna happen. I might decide when it finally comes out that it's something I might want to just try and see how it plays. You know, who knows?
Yeah, definitely. So, and again, I mean, like you said, stranger things have happened, and you with the faith for it. I was like, what is going on? But you know, I mean, and that's the other thing too. I do not, RPGs are not a monolith. You know, like I will never sit here and tell you that a game is unplayable, you know, except for Fatal. That game, no one should play it. But like, I've played 5th edition D&D. I like, so many people put themselves into camps. People like Ben and I can't do that. There's literally too many RPGs on our shelves that there's no way that I could ever, you know, I might even say I have a favorite, but that by no means excludes so many others, because then I would just look like an idiot. And so for me, I would, you know, 5th edition D&D, I've played 5th edition D&D, and you know what? I've had fun playing 5th edition D&D. So I will never sit there and go, you know, oh, these 5th edition refugees who are coming to Pathfinder 2. Refugees implies that they're fleeing something horrible, and they're not. So, that being said, I do own a lot of RPGs. Even though there are many of these books, which I consider to be my favorite, that doesn't mean I don't play other games. So that's no surprise here from Ben and I. That's ours. Go play more games in 2024. Make that your New Year's revolution, you know? Try different types of games. I don't know if you have to try 9 different systems in 10 days like Ben did, but you do have to, I think you should be willing to expand. And now's the time, people. The world's in flux, you know, new systems are out there floating around, and you might actually get a bunch of I hate to say it, but a bunch of players got rabble roused by all the hate mongering, and they're suddenly like, burn Wizard. Yeah, we can't play 5th edition anymore because that company. And it's like, okay, great. Strike while the iron's hot. You know, your group is finally expressing a desire to do something different. Go with that, explore that, use that right before the gravitational pull of the juggernaut eventually pulls them back in. Okay, well, I think we're gonna Diomedes hates 5e D&D. That's okay. You don't have to. I do not like the game Ryutama, but that is for other people. You're not a combat guy, which makes sense. 5th edition D&D has a lot of combat rules. It's mostly a combat game. Shadram says, my resolution is to get a Forbidden Lands game going. That is also on my list of a game that I want to get going, at least a short mini campaign. So I think that is also on my list. So many things to do. All right. Ben, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who donated and supported us today. We got Henry, Rick, Sidon, Save Versus, Marvelous Mr. Mean, Shadram, Hide His Eyes, all who came out today with supports and tips, even though we were at our tip goal. You all did a fantastic and amazing job this week, helping send us out in style. I'm really looking forward to the new year and having a lot of fun. The Knights of Last Call community, we did not grow the way that some other channels grew this year, but we grew in the ways that count and matter, right? We may not have grown in quantity, but we grew in quality. And that is what's the most important thing to me, because I can safely say that by and large, the overwhelming, vast majority of people who come into our community end up being better for it, and we end up being better for them being there. And people disagree. We get into little contentious fights from time to time, but at the end of the day, we're all there to learn, and that is what I think is the most beneficial. And some people stay for a little while, some people stay for a long while, but the end result is, I hope, that we have created a community where people feel free to express themselves, to risk, to learn, and to grow. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for me. It's going to do it for Ben. I want to say thank you to everybody, and we'll see you next year on Knights of Last Call.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Peace.